The millionaire laughs at the waiter and dares, "Translate this," but he silences everyone with one sentence. Michael Anthony Thompson felt his heart race as businessman Richard William Harrison held up a paper with a mocking smile. The Bell. View Restaurant, where Michael had worked for 3 years as a waiter, had never witnessed a scene as tense as that Friday night. "You really think you can impress us with this story about speaking 5 languages?" Richard William said, his voice echoing through the main dining room. "Then prove it, translate this." The paper trembled in the millionaire's hands as Michael felt the eyes of every customer turn toward him. It was exactly the kind of situation he had tried to avoid all these years. His entire life, he had hidden behind the simple waiter's uniform, trying to go unnoticed, but now there was no escape. "Mr. Richard William, I only said that," Michael began, but he was cut off. "No, no, no!" Richard William slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses clink. "You said you spoke German, French, English, Italian, and Mandarin. Now prove it. This document here is in German, and it's very important for my business. If you can actually translate it, I'll pay you $1,000 on the spot." Michael swallowed hard. $1,000 was nearly half his monthly salary. His mother, Mrs. Grace, had been hospitalized for 2 weeks at City General Hospital with heart problems, and the medication she needed cost a fortune. He couldn't waste this chance, but he also knew accepting this challenge would change everything. "And if I can't?" Michael asked, trying to buy time. "If you can't," Richard William laughed loudly, drawing even more attention, "you admit in front of everyone that you're just a lying waiter who makes up stories to seem important." Silence fell over the elegant restaurant. Michael could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. There were about 40 customers that night, mostly business people and high society figures from New York City. Among them, he recognized a few faces from the local media. Mrs. Eleanor, the restaurant owner, watched nervously from the kitchen entrance. She had known Michael since he arrived, desperate for a job, but she had never learned much about his past. He was quiet, hard-working, and never caused trouble. Until now. "Fine," Michael finally said, reaching out his hand. "I accept the challenge." Richard William handed over the document with a triumphant smile. It was a yellowed sheet of paper with handwritten black ink. Michael examined it for a few seconds, and his face gradually paled. "Well," Richard William taunted. "Having trouble?" Michael looked up from the paper and stared directly at the millionaire. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear, carrying an authority no one there had ever heard before. "This document," Michael said slowly, "is a signed confession by your grandfather, Frederick Harrison, admitting he stole the powdered soap formula that became the foundation of your family's empire. The formula originally belonged to a German chemist named Klaus Fischer, who was his partner in 1952. Richard Williams' smile vanished instantly. The restaurant fell into complete silence, so deep you could hear the faint clinking of cutlery in the kitchen. That's impossible," Richard Williams stammered, trying to snatch the paper back from Michael. Michael held the document away and continued, "Your grandfather writes here that Klaus Fischer entrusted him with the formula during World War II, when many Germans fled to the United States. Klaus was sick and asked Frederick to safeguard his research until he recovered. But Klaus never recovered, and Frederick decided to use the formula to build his own company." The whispers began to spread across the tables. Richard William was visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he tried to process what he had just heard. "You're making this up," Richard William shouted, standing up abruptly. "This document is fake. The signature is right here." Michael pointed to the bottom of the paper. "Frederick Harrison, March 15, 1956. And there's a note saying he kept this document as a way to one day tell the truth to the family, but he never had the courage." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot since we're just starting out. Now continuing, Mrs. Eleanor slowly approached, her eyes fixed on the paper Michael held. She had known Frederick Harrison personally when she was young, as he used to frequent her parents' old restaurant in Chinatown. She had always thought There was something odd about how quickly he had become wealthy after the war. "Where did you get this document?" Richard William asked, his voice now lower but laced with threat. Michael hesitated. The truth was, he had found that paper among his grandmother, Mrs. Rose's belongings, after she passed away the year before. She had worked as a maid in the Harrison household for 20 years and always told strange stories about the family. Michael had never paid much attention to his grandmother's tales until he found that document hidden in an old box in her attic. "That doesn't matter now," Michael said. "What matters is that you tried to humiliate me, and now you're the one who's been humiliated." "You miserable wretch!" Richard William lunged toward Michael, but was held back by two friends. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "Richard, calm down," said one of the friends, a gray-haired man Michael recognized as Dr. Frank, a well-known lawyer. "Let's handle this civilly." But Richard William was beyond reason. The Harrison empire was worth millions of dollars, and its reputation was built on the image of an honest, hard-working family that had earned everything through merit. If that document was real and became public, it would mean the end of everything. "Michael," Mrs. Eleanor said, stepping closer to him, "maybe it's best if you go home for today. I'll take care of things here." "No," Michael stood firm. "He challenged me publicly, paid me $1,000 for the translation, and now he'll honor the agreement." Richard William let out a bitter laugh. $1,000? You think $1,000 solves anything?" He grabbed his wallet and threw several bills onto the table. "Take your miserable $1,000, but this isn't over." Michael calmly picked up the money, folded the document, and slipped it into his apron pocket. He knew that night had changed his life forever, but he still didn't grasp just how much. As Richard William and his friends left the restaurant, amid murmurs and curious glances from other customers, Michael tried to process what had just happened. For 3 years, he had managed to keep his life simple and uncomplicated. He worked at the restaurant at night, studied English and literature during the day at the public library, and took care of his mother on weekends. But now, everything had changed. He had exposed himself in a way he never imagined he would, and worse, he had confronted one of the most powerful men in the city. Richard William Harrison wasn't known for forgiving offenses, let alone public humiliations. "Michael," Mrs. Eleanor touched his arm gently, "we need to talk." They headed to the small office at the back of the restaurant. Mrs. Eleanor closed the door and sat behind the old wooden desk, motioning for Michael to take the chair across from her. "First, in 3 years working here, you've never told me anything about your life before coming to Bellevue," she said, crossing her fingers. "I've always respected your privacy, but after what happened today, I think I need to know who I'm dealing with." Michael took a deep breath. Mrs. Eleanor had been more than a boss to him. She'd been like a second mother. When he arrived at the restaurant, desperate and without references, she was the only person who gave him a chance. He owed her at least an explanation. "My real name is Michael Anthony Fisher Thompson," he began, seeing the surprise in Mrs. Eleanor's eyes. "My maternal grandmother was Rose Fisher, daughter of Klaus Fischer." The German chemist Richard William. Mentioned? Exactly. Klaus was my great-grandfather. He really did come to the United States during the war, not as a fugitive, but as a refugee. He was an honest man who had lost everything in Germany and was trying to rebuild his life here. Michael paused, gathering his thoughts. "My grandmother always told me that Klaus had developed a revolutionary formula for cleaning products, but that his American partner had betrayed him. For years, I thought they were just the stories of an old woman longing for the past. Until... You found the document. Yes? When my grandmother passed away, I found a box full of old papers. Most were letters in German that Klaus had written to his family back home but never sent. And then there was this document, the confession of Frederick Harrison." Mrs. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, processing the information. "Michael, do you realize what this means? If this document is real, you're the rightful heir to one of the biggest fortunes in the country." "I know," Michael said, lowering his head. "But I also know Richard William won't let this go. He has power, money and influence. I'm just a waiter." "You're not just a waiter," Mrs. Eleanor said firmly. "You're a smart, educated and honest young man, and now you have proof that your family was wronged." Michael looked out the office window, watching the kitchen staff through the glass. The other employees kept working as usual, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in the main dining room. "Mrs. Eleanor, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you give me a chance that night 3 years ago? I was a stranger, no references, no experience." Mrs. Eleanor smiled sadly. "Because you reminded me of myself when I was young. I also came to New York City with nothing, just the determination to build a better life. My parents were Italian immigrants who worked hard to give me an education. When I saw you that night, in those simple but clean clothes, speaking politely, and just asking for an opportunity, I saw the same hunger to succeed that I once had. And you never regretted it?" "Never. You're the best employee I've ever had. Punctual, dedicated, respectful to customers. Until today, when you translated that document, I had no idea you were so well educated." Michael laughed bitterly. "I always avoided showing it. I learned that when people find out you know more than you let on, they start asking questions. And I didn't want to answer questions. And now? Now I don't have a choice." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in thought. Finally, Mrs. Eleanor stood up. "Michael, you should find a lawyer. This document could change your life." "With what money? And even if I had it, who would believe me against Richard William? Harrison? You'd be surprised. There are plenty of people in the city who don't like the Harrisons' arrogance, and there are lawyers who work for a percentage of what they recover." Michael tucked that information away, but his mind was occupied with more immediate concerns. Richard William wasn't the kind of man to accept humiliation passively. He was probably already planning some kind of retaliation. "Mrs. Eleanor, maybe it's best if I quit my job," Michael finally said. "I don't want to bring trouble to the restaurant." "Absolutely not." Mrs. Eleanor slammed her hand on the table. "You did nothing wrong. That man tried to humiliate you publicly and left here humiliated himself. If he tries anything against you or the restaurant, we'll face it together." Michael was moved by Mrs. Eleanor's loyalty. Over these 3 years, she had been the only constant in his turbulent life. When his mother had been hospitalized, Eleanor had advanced part of his salary without him asking. When Michael needed time off to handle family matters, she never questioned him. "Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor, that means a lot to me." "Michael, can I give you some advice?" Of course. Don't underestimate the power of this document, but also don't underestimate the power of the Harrisons to try and destroy it. If you decide to move forward with this, you'll have to be prepared for a very tough battle." Michael nodded gravely. He already knew that, but hearing it from Mrs. Eleanor made it all feel more real. "For now," Eleanor continued, "go home, rest and think carefully about what you want to do. Tomorrow's Saturday, you don't have to work. Use that time to reflect." "All right, but first, I need to go to the hospital to see my mother. She worries when I don't show up." "How is she doing?" "Better, but still weak. The doctors say she needs rest and expensive medication. At least now I have the $1,000 to help with the expenses." "Michael," Mrs. Eleanor hesitated, "does your mother know about the document?" "No. When I found it, I thought about telling her, but she was already very sick. I didn't want to add to her worries." "Maybe it's time to tell her. She knew your grandmother better than anyone. She might have important information." Michael considered the suggestion. Mrs. Grace had indeed been very close to Mrs. Rose, and always said his grandmother had many secrets from the past she never fully shared. "You're right. I'll talk to her tomorrow." Michael said goodbye to Mrs. Eleanor and left the restaurant through the back door as he always did. But this time he had the feeling he was being watched. He looked around the street, but saw nothing suspicious. Still, he decided to take a different route to the hospital, just to be safe. City General Hospital was about 40 minutes by bus from the restaurant. During the ride, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the night's events. Part of him was proud for standing up to Richard William, but another part was terrified of the possible consequences. The Harrisons controlled many businesses in the city. Richard William had friends in newspapers, City Hall, and even the police. If he wanted to make Michael's life difficult, he had all the tools to do so. When he arrived at the hospital, Michael went straight to room 304 where his mother was staying. Mrs. Grace was awake reading an old magazine by the dim light of the bedside lamp. "Michael," she smiled as he walked in. "I wasn't. Expecting you today. How was work? Michael kissed his mother's forehead and sat in the chair beside the bed. Grace looked better than she had in days. Her cheeks had a bit more color and her eyes were brighter. "Mom, I need to tell you something important," Michael said, pulling the document from his pocket. "What is this?" Michael explained. Everything that had happened at the restaurant, from Richard Williams' challenge to the translation of the document. Grace listened in silence, her eyes widening as he recounted the details. "My God," she murmured when Michael finished. "I always knew your grandmother was hiding something, but I never imagined it was this. Did she ever mention anything about Klaus being robbed?" "She would speak in German when she got nervous." Mrs. Grace smiled sadly. "I never understood the words, but I always felt she carried a deep sorrow, especially when she saw news, reports about the Harrisons on TV. Why did you never tell me this?" "Because I thought it was just the bitterness of an old woman. You know how proud your grandmother was. I figured she made up those stories to feel important." Michael showed the document to his mother. She examined it carefully, though she couldn't read German. "Michael, this signature..." She paused, thoughtful. "I've seen this handwriting before." "Where?" "Your grandmother had a letter she kept, in a small wooden box. It was very old and she never let anyone touch it. But once, when she was very sick, she asked me to get some medicine from the box. I saw a letter with handwriting that looked just like this." Michael felt his heart race. "Where is that box now?" "It's probably still at your grandmother's house. When she passed, you said you'd sort through her things little by little. Mum, I need to go there tomorrow. There might be more evidence." Mrs. Grace held her son's hand. "Michael, I'm worried. The Harrisons are very powerful people. If this is true, they won't let it slide quietly." "I know, Mum, but this could be our chance for a better life. You need expensive treatments, medicine. If we can prove Klaus was robbed, maybe we can get compensation." "What if they try to hurt you?" Michael squeezed his mother's hand. "I won't let that happen, but I also can't pretend I never found this document. That would be a betrayal of great-grandfather Klaus's memory." Mrs. Grace sighed deeply. "Your maternal grandfather always said the Fishers were people of honor, that they'd rather die than accept injustice. I think you inherited that from him." "Is that what Grandma Rose always said?" "Among other things, she said Klaus had a big heart, that he always helped other refugees who came to the United States. That's why he trusted Frederick Harrison's friendship." Michael grew thoughtful. The more he learned about Klaus, the more he felt he had to do right by his memory. "Mom, I'll bring more information tomorrow. For now, rest and don't worry." "Michael, just promise me one thing." "What?" "If things get dangerous, you stop. Your life is worth more than any money." Michael promised, though he knew it would be a hard promise to keep. After kissing his mother goodnight, he left City General Hospital with his mind racing with plans. Mrs. Rose's house was in an old neighborhood on the east side of New York City. It was a simple but well-kept home with a small front garden that Michael had tried to maintain since his grandmother's passing. He still paid the rent, unable to bring himself to part with her belongings. When he got home, Michael went straight to the attic. There were several stacked boxes full of memories and old belongings. He searched specifically for the wooden box. His mother had mentioned and found it beneath some old blankets. It was a small hand-carved box with floral designs. When he opened it, Michael found several documents in German, some old photographs, and, at the bottom, a letter in a yellowed envelope. The letter was in English, written in the same handwriting as the confession he had translated at the restaurant. It was addressed to "My dear Klaus" and dated 1954. Michael read the letter with his heart pounding. Frederick Harrison wrote to apologize for using the formula without permission, but justified it by saying Klaus was very ill and someone needed to use the knowledge so it wouldn't die with him. Frederick promised to compensate Klaus once the company was established, but the letter had never been sent. Inside the envelope there was a note in German that Michael translated, "Klaus passed away before I could deliver this letter. May God forgive me." Michael sat on the attic floor, holding the letter with trembling hands. Now he had two pieces of evidence: Heinrich's full confession and this letter, which showed that he had at least initially tried to do the right thing. But he also discovered something disturbing in the other letters from the small box. Klaus had written several letters to his family in Germany, talking about his partnership with Frederick and his hope of rebuilding his life in the United States. In one of them, Klaus mentioned that he had left detailed instructions about the formula with Frederick, in case anything happened to him. Michael realized Klaus had trusted Frederick completely. This wasn't just theft, it was the worst kind of betrayal from someone Klaus had placed all his faith in. As he organized the documents, Michael heard a strange noise in the garden. It was nearly 2 in the morning, and the neighborhood was usually quiet at that hour. He climbed down from the attic and peeked through the living room window. A black car was parked in front of the house, engine running. Michael couldn't see who was inside because of the tinted windows, but he was sure it wasn't anyone from the neighborhood. He turned off the lights and watched through a gap in the curtains. The car stayed there for another 15 minutes before slowly driving away. Michael waited another half hour before turning the lights back on. This confirmed his suspicions. Richard William had already started investigating him. He'd probably hired someone to find out where Michael lived and what he might be hiding. Michael spent the rest of the night organizing all the documents he had found. Besides the confession and Frederick's letter, there were photos of Klaus with Frederick from 1952, paperwork from the original company they had tried to build together, and even a partnership contract signed by both of them. The more evidence Michael uncovered, the clearer it became that Klaus had been systematically deceived by Frederick. The contract showed Klaus was supposed to own 60% of the company since he had provided the formula and technical expertise, while Frederick was only contributing the startup capital. But Klaus had never officially registered his stake in the company. Frederick had promised to take care of it once the first factory was operational. When Klaus died, Frederick simply continued as the sole owner. By dawn, Michael had made a crucial discovery. Among the papers, he found a copy of Klaus's will written in German. Michael carefully translated it and learned that Klaus had left all his rights to the formula and the company to his daughter Rose, Michael's grandmother. This meant the rights to the formula had legally passed to Rose, then after her death to Grace, and now to Michael. He wasn't just the grandson of a victim, he was the rightful heir to what had been stolen. Michael packed all the documents into a folder and left the house with a determination he hadn't felt in years. His first stop would be the county clerk's office to authenticate copies of the most important papers. Then he'd need to find a lawyer willing to take on the Harrison family. But before anything else, he had to return to the hospital and tell his mother everything. Grace had the right to know that she was technically the rightful heir to one of the largest fortunes in the country. On the bus to the hospital, Michael noticed the same black car from the night before was following him. This time he decided to test his suspicions. He got off 3 stops early and ducked into a bakery. The car parked across the street. Michael bought a coffee and a roll, sat by the window, and pretended to read a newspaper while keeping an eye on the car. After 10 minutes, he left the bakery and took another bus. The car continued to follow. Michael realized he was being professionally watched. This meant Richard William was taking the threat very seriously and was willing to spend money to find out what Michael knew. At the City General Hospital, Michael found his mother talking to Dr. Richardson, the cardiologist in charge of her treatment. "Michael," Dr. Richardson smiled when he saw him. "I was just telling Mrs. Grace that she's responding very well to treatment. If she keeps this up, she could be discharged next week." "That's wonderful," said Michael, feeling genuine relief. "Doctor, how long will she need to keep taking the medication?" "Probably for the rest of her life, but they're medications that allow for a normal life. The important thing is not to stop treatment." After Dr. Richardson left, Michael told his mother about the new documents he had found and the car following him. "Michael, this is getting dangerous," said Grace, worried. "Maybe you should go to the police." "And say what, Mom? That Richard William is having me followed? I don't have proof, and even if I did, do you think the police would investigate one of the richest men in the city based on a waiter's word?" Grace knew her son was right, but she was still concerned. "Then what are you going to do?" "I'm going to find a lawyer today. With all these documents, maybe I can find someone willing to take the case." "Michael, I was thinking, maybe you should go see Mrs. Margaret." "Who's Mrs. Margaret?" An elderly woman who was friends with your grandmother. They met in the German immigrant group at the Little Italy church. Mrs. Margaret always said she had important connections, that she could help with legal matters. Michael wrote down the name and address his mother gave him. Mrs. Margaret lived in Chinatown and, according to Grace, had helped many immigrants with documentation and inheritance issues. "Mom, I need to ask you something important," said Michael, holding her hand. "If we can prove all this and recover at least part of what belongs to us, what would you like to do?" Grace thought for a moment. "Michael, I just want you to have the opportunities I never had. I want you to study law like you've always dreamed, so you don't have to work as a waiter for the rest of your life just to pay my medical bills. And you, what would you like to do?" "I'd like to have my own home without paying rent. I'd like to travel to see your grandmother's homeland, and I'd like to see you happy and fulfilled." Michael was moved by his mother's sincerity. All her life, Grace had made sacrifices to give him the best opportunities possible. Now it was his turn to repay her. "Mom, I promise we'll make it happen, no matter how long it takes or how hard it gets. Just promise me you'll be careful. The Harrisons didn't get where they are by playing nice." Michael spent another hour with his mother before heading to the address she had given him. Mrs. Margaret lived in a small but cozy apartment, decorated with old photos and dark wood furniture. She was a woman of about 80, with white hair tied in a bun and very sharp blue eyes. When Michael introduced himself as Rose Fisher's grandson, her face lit up. "Rose, my dear friend Rose," exclaimed Mrs. Margaret, inviting Michael inside. "How I miss our conversations. Sit down. Tell me how I can help you." Michael explained the whole situation, showing her the documents he had found. Mrs. Margaret examined them carefully, asking specific questions and jotting down details in a notebook. "Michael," she finally said, "your grandmother told me this story many times over the years. She always said that one day the truth would come out. Do you believe the documents are genuine? More than that, I knew Klaus personally when he arrived in the United States. He was a good man, but very naive when it came to business. Frederick Harrison was the opposite, clever, ambitious, and unscrupulous." Mrs. Margaret stood up and went to a cabinet, from which she pulled out an old folder. "Rose left me a few things before she passed away. She said they might be important one day." The folder contained more photos of Klaus and Frederick together, some business letters from when they were trying to establish the company, and something that left Michael stunned: a copy of the original. Formula's registration with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, dated 1951, listing Klaus Fischer as the sole inventor. "Mrs. Margaret, this is incredible," exclaimed Michael. "With this registration, we can prove Klaus created the formula before he ever met Frederick." "Exactly. And with the partnership contract you brought, we can prove Frederick only had permission to use the formula as a partner, not as the sole owner." Michael felt like the puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. "Do you know any lawyers who could help us?" Mrs. Margaret smiled mysteriously. "I know someone who'll be very interested in this case, Dr. Charles Edward Miller. He specializes in inheritance and intellectual property disputes, and he has a personal reason to dislike the Harrisons." "What reason?" "His father was also Frederick Harrison's partner in another business back in the 60s. Frederick used the same tactics, gained his partner's trust, waited for him to die, and took everything." Michael felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Having a specialized lawyer would be crucial, but if Dr. Charles had history with the Harrisons, the battle would be even more complicated. "Could you introduce me to him?" "Of course. I'll call him today and explain the situation. I'm sure he'll want to meet you." Before Michael left, Mrs. Margaret gave him an important warning. "Michael, from now on you need to be very careful. The Harrisons will try everything to discredit you and the documents. They might claim you're a fraud, bribe witnesses, or even frame you for a crime." "What do you mean?" "They have money and influence. If they want, they could plant drugs in your house, accuse you of stealing from the restaurant, or make up any story to paint you as a criminal in the eyes of the law." Michael swallowed hard. He hadn't considered that possibility. "What should I do?" "First, stop living alone in that house. It's too easy for them to plant evidence there. Second, always have reliable witnesses with you. Third, record. everything important. And fourth, keep copies of the documents in safe places. Michael thanked her for the advice and left Mrs. Margaret's apartment with a new perspective on the challenges ahead. This wouldn't just be a legal matter, it would be a war. On his way home, Michael noticed the black car had been replaced by a motorcycle. The Harrisons were taking surveillance seriously. When he got home, Michael found an unpleasant surprise. The front door was slightly open, and he was sure he'd locked it that morning. He hesitated for a moment, wondering whether to go in or call someone. He decided to enter carefully. The house had been searched, not violently, but very professionally. Whoever had broken in had been looking for something specific and tried to leave everything in place to avoid drawing attention. Michael rushed to the attic. The box where he'd kept the original documents was empty. Fortunately, he had taken the most important evidence to show Mrs. Margaret, but several secondary documents had disappeared. Michael understood the message. The Harrisons knew exactly what he had and were willing to take drastic measures to protect their secrets. He grabbed the few important things left in the house and decided to follow Mrs. Margaret's advice. He could no longer live there. Luckily, Mrs. Eleanor had offered the small apartment above the restaurant for emergencies. It was time to accept the offer. On his way to the restaurant, Michael stopped at an electronics store and bought a small digital recorder. If the Harrisons wanted to play dirty, he needed to be prepared. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. When he arrived at Bellevue, Michael found Mrs. Eleanor preparing the restaurant for Saturday night. She grew worried when he told her about the break-in. Michael, this is very serious. You need to file a police report. Mrs. Eleanor, they were very careful. They didn't break anything or make a mess. If I go to the police, they'll say maybe I forgot to lock the door or that someone in the family has a key. So what are you going to do? For now, accept your offer for the apartment above the restaurant, and tomorrow I'll meet the lawyer Mrs. Margaret recommended. Eleanor agreed immediately. The apartment was small but comfortable, and being right above the restaurant would give Michael more security. While helping him settle in, Eleanor shared some troubling news. Michael, this morning I got a strange call. A man claiming to be a health inspector said he received a complaint about the restaurant. He wants to come inspect it on Monday. Do you think this has to do with me? I'm sure of it. In 15 years of business, we've never had issues with health inspections. It's very suspicious that this happens right after yesterday's events. Michael felt guilty for bringing trouble to Eleanor, but she wouldn't let him dwell on it. Michael, don't worry about it. My restaurant is in perfect condition. If they want to play dirty, we'll show them we're not afraid. Over the weekend, Michael took the time to organize all the evidence he had gathered and researched more about the Harrison family's history. He spent hours at the public library, reading old newspapers and public records. He discovered that the Harrisons' rise had been meteoric. In 1950, Frederick was just a small merchant. By 1955, he owned a thriving factory. By 1960, he controlled one of the largest cleaning product companies in the state. But Michael also found something interesting. Frederick had died in 1987, leaving the company to his only son, Robert Edward Harrison, father of the current Richard William. Robert Edward had died prematurely in 2003 at 52, leaving everything to Richard William, who was only 25 at the time. Michael realized Richard William had inherited all that wealth very young, without working to build it. That explained his arrogance and disdain for people he considered beneath him. On Sunday evening, Michael got a call from Mrs. Margaret. Dr. Charles Edward Miller had agreed to meet him Monday morning. The lawyer was very interested in the case and asked Michael to bring all the original documents. On Monday morning, Michael headed to Dr. Charles's office located downtown. It was an old but well-maintained building with an elegant lobby and a vintage elevator. Dr. Charles's office was on the 8th floor and took up the entire side of the building. When Michael entered, he was greeted by a secretary who led him to a comfortable waiting room. Dr. Charles Edward Miller was a man of about 50, tall and lean, with graying hair and piercing eyes. He wore a well-tailored dark suit and carried himself in a way that inspired confidence. "Michael," he said, extending his hand, "Mrs. Margaret told me your story. It's a fascinating and very complex case." They sat at a large table, and Michael spread out all the documents he had gathered. Dr. Charles examined them one by one, asking specific questions and jotting down notes on a pad. "Michael, based on what I'm seeing here, you have a very strong case," Dr. Charles finally said. "The documents appear authentic, the dates are consistent, and Frederick's signature is clearly genuine." "So you think we have a chance of winning?" "A chance? Michael, if we can prove the authenticity of all this in court, you don't just have a chance of winning. You're entitled to compensation that could amount to hundreds of millions of dollars." Michael felt his heart race. Hundreds of millions was an amount he could hardly fathom. "But," Dr. Charles continued, "I need to be honest about the challenges. The Harrisons won't accept this passively. They have the best lawyers in the country, political influence, and plenty of money to spend on a drawn-out defense." "How long could it take?" "If they decide to fight to the end, it could take years. And during that time, they'll try everything to discredit you and the documents." Dr. Charles leaned back in his chair. "Michael, may I ask what your true motivation is in this case? Is it just the money, or is there something more?" Michael thought carefully before answering. "Doctor, it's true my family needs the money. My mother is sick. I work as a waiter, earning little, and I have no prospects for a better life. But there's something more important, justice." "How so?" "My great-grandfather Klaus was an honest man who trusted Frederick's friendship. He was betrayed in the worst way possible. For 70 years, the Harrisons built a fortune based on that betrayal, while my family struggled to survive." Michael paused, gathering his thoughts. "Klaus deserves to have the truth known. My grandmother Rose spent her whole life knowing. Her family had been robbed, but never had the means to fight for justice. Now I have that chance." Dr. Charles smiled approvingly. "That's the answer I wanted to hear. Cases motivated only by money rarely end well, but cases motivated by justice, those are worth fighting for." "So you'll take the case?" "I will, but with a few conditions. First, you need to be prepared for a long, hard battle. Second, you must trust me completely and follow all my advice. Third, you can't do anything related to the case without consulting me first." Michael agreed to all the conditions. "Doctor, how much will it cost?" "Normally, I'd charge upfront fees, but in this case, I'll work for a percentage of what we recover. If we don't win, you owe me nothing." Michael felt relieved. He couldn't have paid upfront fees anyway. "One last thing, Michael," Dr. Charles said, standing up. "From now on, you're not alone in this fight. I've faced the Harrisons before and I know how they operate. We'll be prepared for whatever they try." When Michael left the office, he felt more confident than he had in days. Having an experienced lawyer on his side completely changed the dynamic of the situation, but his confidence didn't last long. When he arrived at the restaurant, he found 3 health inspection cars parked in front of Bellevue. Mrs. Eleanor was arguing heatedly with an inspector at the door. "Michael," she called out when she saw him approaching. "They're saying they received an anonymous complaint about unsanitary conditions." The inspector, a heavy-set, middle-aged man, looked Michael up and down with disdain. "Are you the waiter who works here?" he asked, consulting a clipboard. "I'm Michael Thompson. How can I help you?" "We've received information that you handle food without gloves, lack a food handling certificate, and have a history of personal hygiene issues." Michael was outraged. None of it was true, and he was certain it was more pressure from the Harrisons. "Can I see this complaint?" Michael asked. "Complaints are confidential," the inspector replied curtly. Mrs. Eleanor stepped in. "My restaurant undergoes regular inspections, and we've never had issues. All my employees have up-to-date certifications." "We'll see about that," said the inspector, entering the restaurant with a team of 3. The inspection lasted 3 hours. They examined every inch of the kitchen, checked all certificates, measured refrigerator temperatures, and questioned every employee. To the inspector's obvious frustration, they found no violations. The restaurant was spotless, all documents were in order, and staff demonstrated proper knowledge of health regulations. "Well," the inspector finally said, clearly displeased, "this time we found no issues. But we'll be keeping a close eye on this establishment." After the inspectors left, Mrs. Eleanor and Michael sat at a table to talk. "Michael, this was clearly harassment," Mrs. Eleanor said. "They expected to find problems and were frustrated when they didn't." "Mrs. Eleanor, I'm sorry for bringing this trouble to you." "Michael, stop apologizing. You did nothing wrong. If anyone should apologize, it's the Harrisons for using public agencies for personal vendettas." Michael told Mrs. Eleanor about his meeting with Dr. Charles and the next steps in the legal process. She was optimistic but also concerned. "Michael, now that you have a lawyer, they'll increase the pressure. Be ready for worse than a health inspection." She was right. The rest of the week, Michael faced a series of clearly orchestrated problems from the Harrisons. On Tuesday, he received a summons from the Internal Revenue Service about alleged irregularities in his tax return. On Wednesday, two men claiming to be private investigators asked invasive questions about his personal life. On Thursday, his bank froze his account, citing suspicious activity. Individually, each issue could be coincidence, but together they formed a clear pattern of harassment. Dr. Charles had predicted exactly this kind of pressure. "Michael," Dr. Charles said during a meeting on Friday, "this is standard in cases against the Harrisons. They make life so difficult you'll give up before the case even starts." "Doctor, is this legal?" "Technically, each action has legal justification, but collectively it's harassment. The problem is proving it in court." Dr. Charles had spent the week preparing the lawsuit. He hired experts to authenticate documents, researched similar legal precedents, and crafted a detailed strategy. "Michael, we'll file the lawsuit next Monday," Dr. Charles said. "From then on, everything becomes public. The Harrisons won't be able to act in the shadows anymore. Is that good or bad for us?" "Good because it forces them to respond officially. Bad because they'll use all their media influence to publicly destroy your reputation." Over the weekend, Michael visited his mother at the City General Hospital and updated her on all the developments. Mrs. Grace was physically better, but worried about the intensity of the persecution Michael had been facing. "Michael, maybe there's still time to stop this," she said. "These problems could follow you for the rest of your life." "Mom, if I stop now, they'll know they can intimidate anyone who challenges them. This isn't just about us. It's about all the people they've harmed over the years. What if they try to hurt you physically?" Dr. Charles said that's unlikely. The Harrisons are too smart to get involved in open violence. They prefer methods that can't be traced back to them. On Monday morning, Dr. Charles filed the lawsuit at the New York State Supreme Court. The case sought recognition of Michael's rights to the original formula, financial compensation for the illegal profits made over 70 years, and damages for the persecution his family had endured. The news leaked to the press that same afternoon. Michael was working at the restaurant when Mrs. Eleanor urgently called him to see the television. On the evening news, a reporter stood outside the building housing Harrison Cleaning Products headquarters, interviewing Richard William. "The accusations are completely baseless," Richard William said with his confident smile. "My family built this empire through honest work and dedication. This young man is trying to take advantage of our good reputation for easy money." "But what about the documents he presented?" the reporter asked. "Anyone can forge documents these days. Our lawyers are already reviewing the evidence, and I'm sure they'll prove it's nothing more than an elaborate fraud." Michael felt his blood boil, hearing Richard William call him a fraud on national television. But Dr. Charles had instructed him not to respond to media provocations. "Michael," Mrs. Eleanor said, turning off the TV, "he's trying to provoke you into making a mistake. Don't fall for it." In the following days, the story gained prominence in the local media. Some newspapers treated the case seriously, but others clearly favored the Harrisons' version. Michael realized Richard William had a lot of influence with the press. The worst moment came when a gossip magazine published an article titled "The Ambitious Waiter." The piece painted Michael as an opportunist who had fabricated an elaborate story to extort money from a respectable family. "Michael," Dr. Charles said when they met on Wednesday, "this is exactly what I expected. They're trying to destroy your credibility before the first hearing. Doctor, people will believe them. They have more money, more influence, better lawyers. Michael, you're forgetting one very important thing. We have the truth on our side, and the truth always has its own power." Dr. Charles showed Michael a stack of letters he had received at the office. "Look at this. Since the news broke, I've gotten over 50 letters from people who want to share stories about the Harrisons' questionable practices over the years." Michael skimmed through some of the letters. They were accounts from former employees, ex-partners, suppliers, and competitors who had been harmed by the Harrison family in different ways. "Can this help us in the case?" "Absolutely. It shows a pattern of behavior. If we can prove the Harrisons have a history of unethical practices, it'll be easier to believe they really stole your great-grandfather's formula." Dr. Charles had spent the week analyzing the Harrisons' legal response. As expected, they had hired the most prestigious law firm in New York City. "Michael, they're taking this very seriously. They've hired 8 lawyers for the case, including 2 intellectual property specialists. Is that bad for us?" "Actually, it's good. If they had nothing to hide, 1 or 2 lawyers would be enough. The fact they hired such a large team suggests they're worried." The Harrisons' official response came on Friday. They denied all accusations and presented a completely different version of events. According to them, Frederick Harrison had developed the formula alone. Klaus Fischer had only been a temporary consultant, and all documents presented by Michael were forgeries. They also filed a defamation lawsuit against Michael, claiming he was slandering the family and harming the company's business. "Michael," said Dr. Charles, "the war is now officially declared. They're not just defending themselves, they're attacking. What does that mean for me?" "It means you need to be prepared for your life to be completely scrutinized. They'll investigate every aspect of your past, trying to find anything they can use against you." Michael swallowed hard. His life had no major secrets, but everyone has moments they're not proud of. "Doctor, there's something I haven't told you," Michael said hesitantly. "What?" "When I was a teenager at 16, I was arrested for stealing food from a supermarket. My mother was unemployed and we had nothing to eat. It was the only time I committed a crime, but it's on my record." Dr. Charles noted the information. "Michael, thank you for telling me. It's better I know these things before their lawyers find out. They'll certainly use this to paint you as a habitual criminal. Will this hurt our case?" "It'll make it harder, but not impossible. We'll have to work to show it was an act of desperation by a hungry teenager, not a pattern of criminal behavior." Michael left the meeting with Dr. Charles feeling vulnerable. The Harrisons had all the resources to investigate his life, while he barely knew where to start investigating their past. But an unexpected conversation at the restaurant the next evening changed that. Michael was serving a table of regular customers when an elderly man discreetly called him over. "Young man," the man said quietly, "could you sit here with me for a moment?" Michael looked around. The restaurant was relatively empty, so he sat down. "My name is Sebastian Oliver," the man said. "I worked at the Harrison factory for 30 years, from 1965 to 1995. Michael felt his heart race. "I saw you on television and recognized the name Fischer," Sebastian continued. "There's something you need to know about the Harrison soap formula." "What?" "In 1978, the company hired a new chemist to improve the original formula. I was production supervisor and attended the meetings. The chemist said the formula they were using was too advanced to have been developed in the 50s. Michael held his breath. He said whoever created that formula was a chemistry genius, way ahead of their time. Robert Edward Harrison, the current Richard Williams' father, got nervous and fired the chemist that same week. Do you remember that chemist's name?" "Dr. Henry Carter. At the time, he told me he suspected the formula had been stolen from someone. Said Frederick Harrison didn't have the technical knowledge to develop something that sophisticated." Michael could barely contain his excitement. This was exactly the kind of testimony Dr. Charles said they'd need. "Mr. Sebastian, would you be willing to tell this to my lawyer? That's why I'm here, son. I always knew something was wrong with that story. If you truly are the grandson of the real creator of the formula, then it's time for the truth to come out." Michael arranged a meeting between Sebastian and Dr. Charles for the following Monday. When he shared the news with the lawyer over the phone, Dr. Charles was thrilled. "Michael, this testimony could be crucial, and if we can find this Dr. Henry Carter, we'll have an expert to corroborate Sebastian's version." Over the weekend, Michael and Dr. Charles worked to locate Dr. Henry Carter. They discovered he was still alive, 82 years old, and living in a small town outside New York City. Dr. Charles called him and explained the situation. Dr. Henry was very interested in helping confirming Sebastian's account and adding important technical details. "Dr. Charles," Dr. Henry said over the phone, "I kept copies of all my reports from that time. I have detailed analyses of the formula that show it was far more advanced than anything available in the 1950s. Would you be willing to testify in the case?" "Absolutely. It always bothered me that the Harrisons took advantage of someone else's work. If I can help bring justice, I'll do it gladly." On Monday, Dr. Charles met with Sebastian and was impressed by how many details the former employee remembered. Sebastian had kept some documents from his time at the factory, including production reports that mentioned technical issues about the formula. "Dr. Charles," Sebastian said, "there's something else that might interest you. In 1982, Frederick Harrison had a stroke and was incapacitated for several months. During that time, he kept repeating Klaus Fischer's name." "What do you mean?" "His mind was confused from the stroke, and he said things he normally would have kept secret. Several times I heard him apologizing to Klaus, saying it shouldn't have happened that way." Dr. Charles took careful notes. Every new detail strengthened Michael's case. "Sebastian, is there anyone else from that time who could confirm this information?" "There's Mrs. Julia, who was Frederick's personal secretary. She knew all the family's secrets, but I don't know if she's still alive." Dr. Charles added Mrs. Julia's name to his list of people to investigate. The case was becoming more complex, but also stronger. Meanwhile, the Harrisons' lawyers weren't sitting idle. Michael began noticing his life was being scrutinized even more intensely. People he knew started getting calls from investigators asking about his character and past. The worst moment came when Michael was called to a meeting at the bank, where he'd tried to open a new account after his previous one was frozen. "Mr. Thompson," the manager said nervously, "unfortunately, we won't be able to open your account." "Why?" "Our risk assessment department identified irregularities in your profile." Michael knew it was a lie. The bank had been pressured by the Harrisons, who likely had influence over several financial institutions in the city. Dr. Charles advised Michael to document all these incidents, as they could be used as evidence of harassment in the case. "Michael," Dr. Charles said, "they're making a strategic mistake. The more pressure they put on you, the more obvious it becomes they have something to hide." The first court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Dr. Charles had prepared a detailed presentation with all the documents, witnesses, and evidence they'd gathered. "Michael, at the hearing, you'll meet the Harrisons' legal team. They'll try to intimidate you with aggressive questions and insinuations. It's important to stay calm and answer only what's asked." "Doctor, what are our real chances of winning?" Dr. Charles thought carefully before answering. "Michael, based on the evidence we have, I'd say our chances are about 70%. That's very good for a case against such a powerful family. But remember, even if we win, they will certainly appeal. This could take years. And if we lose? If we lose, you can still appeal, but you'll have to consider whether you have the emotional and financial strength to keep fighting." Michael spent the following days mentally preparing for the hearing. Mrs. Eleanor had given him the day off, and his mother had been discharged from the hospital and was recovering at home. The night before the hearing, Michael received an unexpected call. "Michael Thompson?" said a woman's voice. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Julia Sanders. I heard you're investigating the Harrison family." Michael nearly dropped the phone. It was Mrs. Julia, the woman Sebastian had mentioned. "Mrs. Julia, Sebastian Oliver told me about you. Did you really work for Frederick Harrison?" "I worked as his personal secretary for 15 years, and there are many things you need to know." Michael arranged to meet Mrs. Julia the next day, after the hearing. She said she had important documents she had kept all these years. On the morning of the hearing, Michael wore the best suit he could afford with the money Richard William had given him that night at the restaurant. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. The courtroom was packed. Besides the lawyers, from both sides there were journalists, onlookers, and a few people Michael recognized as having sent letters of support to Dr. Charles. Richard William arrived with his team of 8 lawyers, all dressed in expensive suits and carrying leather briefcases. He greeted reporters with confident smiles and posed for photos. When Richard Williams saw Michael, his eyes narrowed in pure disdain. Michael held his gaze, remembering Dr. Charles's advice about keeping his composure. The judge was Dr. Anthony Fitzgerald Costa, a man in his 60s with a reputation for seriousness and impartiality. He listened patiently to the opening arguments from both sides. Dr. Charles presented the case clearly and objectively, laying out the evidence chronologically and explaining how each document connected to the others. The Harrisons' lawyers immediately attacked the authenticity of the documents, claiming they were crude forgeries meant to deceive the court. "Your Honor," said the Harrisons' lead attorney, "it's clear we're dealing with an extortion attempt based on fabricated documents. The plaintiff lacks the technical knowledge to have created such elaborate forgeries, which suggest there's a larger scheme behind this." Michael felt anger rising, but Dr. Charles calmed him with a subtle gesture. The judge ordered the documents to be submitted for official forensic analysis and scheduled another hearing in a month when the results would be ready. "Michael," Dr. Charles said as they left the courtroom, "this first hearing went better than I expected. The judge seemed interested in the evidence and wasn't swayed by their lawyer's rhetoric. Doctor, can they really prove the documents are fake?" "Michael, the documents are real and the forensic analysis will confirm that. They know it, which is why they're trying to cast doubt with insinuations and conspiracy theories." After the hearing, Michael met Mrs. Julia at a cafe near the courthouse. She was an elegant woman in her mid-70s with sharp, perceptive eyes. "Michael," she said, pulling a folder from her bag, "I worked for Frederick Harrison from 1970 to 1985. During that time, I saw and heard many things that confirm your story." Mrs. Julia opened the folder and showed letters, notes, and documents she had secretly kept all these years. "Frederick always had nightmares related to Klaus Fischer. Many times I heard him talking to himself in the office, asking for forgiveness for something he had done. When I asked, he always changed the subject. Do you have evidence of this? I have these notes I wrote in my personal diary. And I have something even more important, a conversation I secretly recorded in 1978. Michael and Dr. Charles exchanged glances, surprised. "A recording?" asked Dr. Charles. "Frederick had drunk too much at a business meeting and started talking about Klaus Fischer. He said Klaus was a genius, that the formula was revolutionary, and that he had promised to share the profits, but Klaus died before it could happen." Mrs. Julia pulled an old small recorder from the folder. "I always kept this as a kind of insurance. Frederick was a dangerous man when crossed. I thought I might need to protect myself someday." Dr. Charles was visibly moved. "Mrs. Julia, this recording could be the definitive evidence we need. With this, there's no way they can deny that Frederick really stole the formula." "Why did you decide to speak up now?" asked Michael. "Because I saw Richard Williams' arrogance on TV and remembered Frederick doing the exact same thing, humiliating people he considered beneath him. The whole family is like that. They think they can do anything because they have money." Mrs. Julia shared several stories about questionable practices by the Harrisons that she had witnessed over the years while working for them. Bribes, intimidation of competitors, exploitation of employees, tax evasion. "Michael," she said, "your family wasn't the only one harmed by the Harrisons. They've destroyed many people over the years, always using the same method: gain their trust, uncover their secrets, and then use that information against them." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Dr. Charles asked Mrs. Julia to formalize her testimony and hand over the recording to be analyzed by court experts. She agreed but asked for protection, fearing retaliation from the Harrisons. "Mrs. Julia," said Dr. Charles, "once your testimony is official, you'll be under the protection of the court. Any attempt at intimidation will be considered obstruction of justice." In the following weeks, while waiting for the forensic results, the Harrisons' lawyers intensified their smear campaign against Michael. Magazines and newspapers began publishing articles questioning his mental stability, moral integrity, and even his intellectual capacity. One magazine went so far as to hire a psychiatrist to analyze Michael from a distance, based solely on photos and videos. The diagnosis suggested Michael suffered from delusional disorder and delusions of grandeur. "Michael," said Dr. Charles, "this shows their desperation. People confident in their innocence don't need to personally destroy their opponent." The worst attack came when someone obtained a photo of Michael being arrested at 16 and published it on the front page of a tabloid with the headline, "The Criminal Past of the Fake Heir." Michael was devastated. The photo showed a thin, frightened teenager being led away by a police officer, an image he thought he'd never see again. "Michael," said Mrs. Eleanor when she saw him arrive at the restaurant completely crushed, "don't let them break you. Anyone with half a brain can see this is harassment." But Michael was starting to wonder if it was even worth continuing. The constant pressure was affecting his mental health. His mother was worried, and even his co-workers had started treating him differently. It was Mrs. Grace who made him change his mind. "Michael," she said when he visited her the following evening, "your grandmother Rose spent 70 years dreaming of the day the truth would come out. Do you think she would give up because of a few lies in the newspapers?" "Mom, they're destroying my reputation. Even if I win the case, they'll always see me as the waiter who tried to deceive a respectable family." "Michael, when you were a child and the boys at school mocked you for being poor, what did I teach you?" Michael smiled sadly. "That people's opinions didn't change who I really was." "Exactly. You know who you are, I know who you are. Dr. Charles knows who you are, the rest is just noise." The conversation with his mother renewed Michael's determination. He returned to Dr. Charles with fresh energy. "Doctor, what can we do to speed up the case? Every day that passes, they invent more lies about me." "Michael, we actually have good news. The forensic results came in, and they confirmed all the documents are authentic. Plus, Mrs. Julia's recording was analyzed and is also genuine." Michael felt a wave of relief. "Does that mean we'll win?" "It means our position is much stronger, but we still have to face the appeals they'll certainly file." The second hearing was even tenser than the first. When the official expert confirmed the authenticity of all the documents, Richard Williams' face visibly faltered. But the Harrisons' lawyers didn't give up. They presented a new theory. Even if the documents were real, that didn't prove Klaus had rights to the formula, since it could have been developed jointly with Frederick. Dr. Charles countered by presenting the recording of Frederick confessing that the formula belonged to Klaus and that he had promised to share the profits. The recording caused an uproar in the courtroom. "This is inadmissible," shouted the Harrisons' lead attorney. "A recording made without consent can't be used as evidence." "Your Honor," Dr. Charles replied calmly, "the recording was made by an employee in the course of her duties, and the content reveals a spontaneous confession of a crime. That makes the evidence perfectly admissible." The judge called a recess to consider the matter. Michael could see Richard William arguing heatedly with his lawyers on the other side of the room. When the hearing resumed, the judge ruled to accept the recording as valid evidence. At that moment, Michael knew the case had taken a decisive turn in his favor. But Richard William wasn't ready to accept defeat easily. During the break, he approached Michael. "You think you've already won?" Richard William said in a low but threatening voice. "You have no idea what I can do to ruin your life." "Mr. Harrison," Michael replied, keeping his composure, "you've already tried everything, and yet here we are proving your family was built on a lie." "Your family has always been losers, Michael. Your great-grandfather was a loser. Your grandmother was a loser. Your mother is a loser, and so are you. Money won't change that." Michael felt anger rising, but he remembered Dr. Charles's advice. Instead of reacting, he smiled. "Mr. Harrison, if my family is full of losers, why are you spending millions of dollars trying to defeat us?" Richard William had no answer for that. The hearing ended with the judge scheduling a final ruling for 2 weeks later. All the evidence had been presented, all the witnesses had been heard, and now all that remained was to wait for the verdict. Michael spent those 2 weeks in a constant state of anxiety. One moment he felt confident that justice would be served, the next he worried that the Harrisons' influence might sway the decision. Dr. Charles tried to keep him calm. Michael, we've done everything we could. We presented solid evidence, credible witnesses, and a clear line of argument. Now it's up to the courts. Doctor, what if the judge is influenced by the Harrisons? Michael, Dr. Anthony Fitzgerald Costa has an impeccable reputation. In 30 years on the bench, there's never been even a hint of corruption. Trust the system. The night before the verdict, Michael visited his grandmother Rose's grave. He brought flowers and a copy of all the documents they had uncovered. "Grandma Rose," he said, kneeling before the simple headstone, "tomorrow we'll know if we've won justice for Klaus. I know you always believed this day would come." Michael stayed at the cemetery for over an hour, gathering his thoughts and preparing himself for any outcome. On the day of the ruling, the courtroom was even more crowded than during previous hearings. The press had turned the case into a symbol of the struggle between the powerful and the underprivileged. Michael arrived with Dr. Charles, Mrs. Eleanor, his mother Grace, Mrs. Margaret Sebastian, and Mrs. Julia. Richard William came with his team of lawyers and a few company executives. Judge Anthony Fitzgerald Costa entered the room with a solemn expression. He sat down, arranged his papers, and looked at both parties. After carefully reviewing all the evidence presented, the judge began, "As well as witness testimonies and expert reports, I have reached the following conclusions." The courtroom was utterly silent. First, it has been sufficiently proven that the documents submitted by the plaintiff, Michael Thompson, are authentic, dating back to the 1950s and 1960s. Michael's heart raced. Second, it has been proven, through recordings and witness statements, that Frederick Harrison acknowledged during his lifetime that the soap formula was created by Klaus Fischer. Richard William looked visibly tense. Third, it has been established that Klaus Fischer was the maternal grandfather of the plaintiff, thereby confirming a legitimate line of succession for the intellectual property rights in question. Dr. Charles gave Michael's arm a discreet squeeze. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I rule in favor of the plaintiff Michael Thompson, recognizing his rights to the original formula created by Klaus Fischer and ordering Harrison Cleaning Products to pay financial compensation for profits gained through unauthorized use of this intellectual property from 1955 to 2024. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and chatter. Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. "The compensation amount," the judge said, calling for silence, "will be determined by a specific financial audit, but based on the company's profits over the last 70 years, I estimate it will range between $200 and $300 million. Michael's legs nearly gave way. $200 million was more money than he could fathom. Furthermore, the judge added, I order Harrison Cleaning Products to publish in major newspapers a public acknowledgement that the formula for their products was originally created by Klaus Fischer, not Frederick Harrison." Richard William abruptly stood up. "Your Honor, we will appeal this decision. This is outrageous." "That is the defense's right," the judge replied calmly. "But until the appeals are resolved, my ruling stands." When Michael left the courthouse, he was swarmed by reporters. Dr. Charles stepped forward and gave a brief but powerful statement. Justice was served today. After 70 years of lies, the truth finally came to light. Klaus Fischer was recognized as the true creator of the formula that spawned one of the country's largest business empires. Michael embraced his mother, who was crying with emotion. Mrs. Eleanor, Mrs. Margaret Sebastian, and Mrs. Julia were also moved by the victory. "Michael," said Grace through tears, "your grandmother Rose is smiling in heaven today." But Michael knew this victory was only the beginning. Richard William had promised to appeal, and the Harrison family had the resources to drag out the legal battle for years. "Dr. Charles," Michael asked, "how long could the appeal take?" "Michael, they'll certainly try every possible avenue. It could take 2 to 5 years for everything to be settled definitively. And if they manage to overturn the decision?" "Michael, with the evidence we have, it's very unlikely. But you need to be prepared for a long fight ahead." In the days following the ruling, Michael felt a strange mix of euphoria and anxiety. On one hand, he had proven his family had been wronged. On the other, he knew the Harrisons wouldn't give up easily. The first retaliation came the very next week. Michael was fired from the restaurant after an inspection allegedly found irregularities in his work documents. Mrs. Eleanor was outraged, but could do nothing against an official order. "Michael," she said, "this is clearly harassment, but my hands are tied. Mrs. Eleanor, you've already done more for me than anyone could. Now I'll use this time to focus entirely on the case." Michael also began receiving anonymous threats by phone and intimidating letters. Dr. Charles advised him to document everything and file police reports. "Michael, they're getting desperate. That shows they know they'll lose the appeal too." But the Harrisons had more resources than Michael anticipated. They hired private investigators to dig into every aspect of Michael's life, Dr. Charles's, and all the witnesses who had testified in his favor. The situation grew even tenser when Sebastian Oliver was approached by men claiming to be investigators, offering him money to change his testimony. "Michael," Sebastian said in a nervous call, "they offered me $100,000 to say I lied in court. Are you going to accept?" "Of course not, but it shows they'll stop at nothing." Dr. Charles filed a formal complaint against the Harrisons for witness tampering, though he knew proving it would be difficult. 3 months after the initial ruling, the New York State Supreme Court accepted the Harrisons' appeal and scheduled a new trial. Michael had to go through the entire process again, this time in a higher court. The second trial was even more intense. The Harrisons' lawyers brought in international experts to question the authenticity of the documents, despite them already being validated by official specialists. They also introduced a new argument. Even if Klaus had created the original formula, Frederick had made significant improvements over the years, granting him rights to the final version. Dr. Charles countered this claim with the help of Dr. Henry Carter, the chemist who had worked at the company in the 70s. "Your Honors," Dr. Henry testified, "I've analyzed both Klaus Fischer's original formula and the later versions from Harrison cleaning products. The changes made over the years were minimal and didn't alter the essence of the original creation." The second trial lasted 4 days. Michael had to testify again, facing even more aggressive questioning from the Harrison family's lawyers. "Mr. Thompson," said the lead defense attorney, "isn't it true that you forged these documents with the help of experts in counterfeiting?" "No, that's a lie," Michael replied calmly. "Isn't it true that you're trying to take advantage of the Harrison family's good faith to extort money?" "No, I'm only trying to bring justice to my great-grandfather Klaus's memory." "Mr. Thompson, you have a criminal record. How can we trust the word of someone who has committed crimes?" Michael took a deep breath before answering. "When I was 16, I made the mistake of stealing food because my family was starving. It was the only time in my life I committed a crime, and I deeply regret it. But that has nothing to do with the truth about my great-grandfather Klaus." Dr. Charles was proud of how Michael handled the provocations. After 5 days of deliberation, the appellate judges delivered their decision. By a vote of 2-1, they upheld the lower court's ruling, confirming Michael's right to financial compensation. Richard William was visibly shaken by yet another defeat. His lawyers immediately announced they would appeal to the United States Court of Appeals. "Michael," Dr. Charles said after the hearing, "we're very close to the final victory, but we still have one more court to face." "Doctor, how long could it take?" "The Court of Appeals may take up to 2 years to rule on the appeal, but our position is stronger than ever." During the following months, while awaiting the Court of Appeals decision, Michael tried to rebuild his life. With the money he had saved from his years as a waiter, he managed to pay for night classes at a private law school. His mother, Mrs. Grace, had fully recovered from her heart problems and now helped Michael organize all the legal documents. "Michael," she said one day, "no matter the final outcome, you've already done more for Klaus than any of us ever dreamed." "Mom, we can't give up now. We're so close." Michael had become something of a local celebrity. Many people stopped him on the street to greet him and say they were rooting for him. It motivated him to keep fighting. But the Harrisons hadn't given up pressuring him either. They filed several lawsuits for emotional damages, claiming Michael had defamed the family in the press. "Michael," Dr. Charles said, "this is typical of them. They want to wear you down with side lawsuits, so you'll give up the main case." "Doctor, could they actually convict me in these cases?" It's unlikely, but even if they did, it would be a hollow victory. The important thing is to stay focused on the main case. 18 months after the appeal was filed, the date for the Court of Appeals hearing finally arrived. Michael traveled to Washington, D.C., accompanied by Dr. Charles and his mother. The Court of Appeals was even more imposing than the state courts Michael had been in before. The 5 justices who would rule on the case had reputations for exceptional legal expertise. Michael, Dr. Charles said the night before the hearing, tomorrow could be the most important day of your life. After nearly 3 years of fighting, we'll finally have a definitive decision. Doctor, what are our chances? Michael, considering we've already won in 2 courts and have solid evidence, I'd say our chances are 80%. But the Court of Appeals is unpredictable. The hearing was broadcast live on television, given the national attention the case had gained. Michael had become a symbol of the little guy fighting against the powerful. When the presiding justice began reading the ruling, Michael held his mother's hand. After a detailed analysis of the entire case, one said the justice, there is no doubt that Klaus Fischer was the true creator of the formula that gave rise to the business empire of the Harrison family. Michael felt his heart race. The documentary evidence is solid, the witnesses are credible, and the technical analysis confirms the authenticity of all elements presented by the claimant, the justice continued. Furthermore, the recording where Frederick Harrison confesses to having appropriated Klaus Fischer's formula is definitive proof of the criminal origin of the family fortune. Richard William, who was present at the Injustice hearing, was visibly nervous. For these reasons, concluded the presiding justice, I vote to uphold the decisions of the lower courts, confirming Michael Thompson's right to financial compensation. The other 4 justices unanimously agreed with the ruling. Michael had won in the highest court of the United States. When he left the U.S. Court of Appeals, Michael was surrounded by journalists from across the country. This time he gave the statements himself. Today, justice was served not just for my family, but for everyone who believes that the truth always prevails over lies, no matter how powerful those lies may be. Michael paused, emotional. My great-grandfather Klaus Fischer came to the United States as a refugee, believing in the honesty and solidarity of the American people. He was betrayed by someone he trusted, but today, America has shown it does not tolerate injustice. The impact of the decision was immediate. Harrison Cleaning Products saw its stock plummet, several suppliers cancelled contracts, and Richard William faced an unprecedented public relations crisis. But for Michael, the most important thing wasn't the Harrisons' downfall. It was the feeling that he had honored his family's memory. The following week, Michael received an unexpected call from Dr. Charles. Michael, Richard William wants to negotiate a settlement. What do you mean? He knows he has no legal options left. The Court of Appeals decision is final. Now he wants to try minimizing the damage by negotiating the terms of the compensation. Doctor, what do you think? Michael, legally, you've already won everything. Negotiating could speed up the payment and avoid further strain for both sides. Michael agreed to participate in the negotiation, but with one condition. Richard William would have to publicly acknowledge in person that Klaus Fischer had been the true creator of the formula. The meeting took place at Dr. Charles's office. Richard William arrived accompanied only by a lawyer, a dramatic change from the large entourages he used to bring to court. Michael, said Richard William, visibly aged by years of legal battles, I'm here to acknowledge that my grandfather, Frederick, made a terrible mistake by taking your great-grandfather's formula. Michael was surprised by Richard William's sudden humility. I've spent the last 3 years fighting something I always knew, deep down, was true, Richard William continued. My family built its fortune on a lie, and that shames me deeply. Why are you telling me this now? Michael asked. Because I'm tired of living a lie, tired of defending the indefensible, and because you taught me an important lesson that night at the restaurant, that arrogance and contempt for others always find a way to backfire. Richard William paused, collecting his thoughts. Michael, I proposed this meeting for 2 reasons. First, to formally apologize on behalf of my family for what they did to Klaus Fischer. Second, to propose a settlement that's fair to everyone. Dr. Charles then presented the terms of the agreement. Michael would receive $250 million as compensation for the profits illegally obtained over 70 years. Additionally, Harrison Cleaning Products would publish ads in national newspapers recognizing Klaus Fischer as the true creator of the formula. "There's one more condition," said Richard William. "I'd like to propose that part of the compensation be used to create a research and development center named after Klaus Fischer. It would be a way to honor his memory in a productive manner." Michael was moved by the proposal. It was exactly the kind of tribute Klaus would have appreciated. "I accept all the conditions," said Michael. "But I want to add one, that the research center also develops scholarships for young students from humble families who want to study chemistry and engineering." "Deal," said Richard William, extending his hand. When they shook hands, Michael felt a cycle had closed. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a reconciliation between two families that had been divided by betrayal 70 years earlier. The settlement was finalized in 2 weeks. Michael received the full financial compensation and could finally provide the life he had always dreamed of for his mother and himself. Mrs. Grace bought a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood with a garden where she could grow the flowers she had always loved. Michael finished law school and opened a firm specializing in defending small investors against large corporations. The Klaus Fischer Research Center was inaugurated a year later, attended by Michael, his family, and, surprisingly, Richard William Harrison. During the ceremony, Richard William gave an emotional speech. Klaus Fischer represented the very best in humanity: creativity, generosity, and trust in others. "My grandfather betrayed that trust, but today we begin to correct this historical wrong." Michael also spoke at the ceremony. "This center isn't just a tribute to the past, it's an investment in the future. May the research developed here benefit all of humanity, and may no talented young person be denied their dreams for lack of opportunity." In the following years, Michael became a respected and successful lawyer. He specialized in intellectual property cases and always took on clients who had been wronged by large corporations. His mother, Mrs. Grace, fulfilled her dream of visiting Germany and seeing Klaus Fischer's hometown. There she met distant relatives who still remembered him fondly. Mrs. Eleanor expanded the Bellevue restaurant and turned it into one of the most esteemed in New York City. She always reserved a special table for Michael and his family. Dr. Charles became Michael's law partner. Together, they won several important cases defending small business owners against unethical corporate practices. Richard William Harrison completely restructured his family's business. He implemented social responsibility programs, improved working conditions for employees, and became a businessman respected for his ethical practices. 5 years after the settlement, Michael married Anna Catherine, a chemist he met at the Klaus Fischer Research Center. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, held in Mrs. Grace's garden. During the celebration, Michael made a special toast. "I'd like to toast to the memory of Klaus Fischer, who taught us that honesty and perseverance always triumph over dishonesty and arrogance. And I'd like to toast to everyone who believed in our fight when it seemed impossible." Michael looked at his mother, at Dr. Charles, at Mrs. Eleanor, at Mrs. Margaret, and at all the friends who had supported him during the hardest times. "Most of all, I'd like to toast to justice. It may take time, but it always comes to those who have the patience and courage to fight for it." When Michael and Anna Catherine had their first child 2 years later, they decided to name him Klaus, in honor of the great-grandfather Michael had never met, but who changed his life forever. During the baptism ceremony, Michael held the baby in his arms and whispered, "Klaus, you were born into a family that learned the truth always prevails over lies, and may you grow up proud to carry this name and this lesson." Mrs. Grace, now a grandmother, watched the scene with tears in her eyes. She thought about how her mother-in-law, Mrs. Rose Fischer, would have been happy to know the name Klaus would continue to be honored by future generations. Michael became a sought-after speaker to share his story at universities and corporate events. He always ended his talks with the same reflection. The difference between a winner and a loser isn't about money or social status. It's about the courage to fight for what's right, even when everyone says it's impossible. The Klaus Fischer Research Center became a national leader in sustainable and eco-friendly product development. Many of its discoveries were licensed for free to companies in developing countries, just as Klaus would have wanted. 10 years after it all began, Michael organized a special dinner at the Bellevue restaurant to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the first court hearing in the case. Everyone who had been important in his journey was there. Mrs. Eleanor, now in her 70s but still active, personally prepared the evening's menu. Dr. Charles, his partner and friend, brought his wife and children. Mrs. Margaret, Sebastian, and Mrs. Julia, the brave witnesses who had made victory possible, were all present. To everyone's surprise, Richard William Harrison also showed up, accompanied by his wife and 2 teenage sons. "Michael," Richard William said during dinner, "I wanted my children to meet you in person. They need to understand there's a difference between having money and having character." Michael was moved by Richard William's presence. Over the years, they had developed an unlikely friendship built on mutual respect and admiration for the transformation they had both experienced. During dinner, Michael told Richard Williams' children the full story of Klaus Fischer, from his arrival in the United States to the revelation of the truth 70 years later. "The most important lesson from this story," Michael said, "isn't that we recovered the money that belonged to us. It's that we restored our family's dignity and honored the memory of a good man who was wronged." Richard Williams' children listened intently, and the eldest, 16 years old, asked a question that touched Michael deeply. "Mr. Michael, if my great-grandfather Frederick apologized to your great-grandfather Klaus in person, do you think he would forgive him?" Michael thought carefully before answering. "Your great-grandfather Klaus had a big heart. Based on everything I've learned about him, I'm sure he would have forgiven Frederick, especially if he saw his family had learned from the mistakes of the past." Richard William was moved by the answer. "Michael, thank you for giving us the chance to make amends for our family's mistakes. You could have chosen revenge, but you chose justice and reconciliation." At the end of the evening, after everyone had said goodbye, Michael walked alone through the neighborhood where it all began. He stopped in front of the building where the old apartment he had shared with his mother once stood, before everything changed. Michael reflected on the incredible journey he had lived. From a publicly humiliated waiter to a respected lawyer, from a man with no prospects to a millionaire philanthropist, from a voiceless person to a symbol of the fight for justice. But what made him most proud wasn't the material achievements. It was proving that an ordinary person, armed only with truth and determination, could stand up to the most powerful and win. Michael looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "Thank you, Klaus. Thank you for teaching us that honesty is the greatest treasure a family can have." The next day, Michael woke up early and went to the cemetery to visit his grandmother Rose's grave. He brought a wreath of flowers and a copy of the newspaper article published the day before, telling the full story of the Fischer family. "Grandma Rose," he said, kneeling before the headstone, "we did it. We brought justice for Klaus and honored our family. The truth finally came out, and now the whole world knows you were always people of integrity." Michael placed the article on the headstone, tucked beneath the flowers. Now Klaus can rest in peace, knowing his creation is being used to help others achieve their dreams. As Michael stood up to leave, he felt a gentle breeze and had the sense that his grandmother was smiling at him from somewhere. Michael returned home, where Anna Catherine was waiting with little Klaus, now 3 years old, playing in the garden. Mrs. Grace was preparing Sunday lunch, a tradition the family had kept all these years. "Michael," Anna Catherine said, "Klaus was asking about his German great-grandfather. I think it's time we start telling him the story." Michael smiled and sat on the garden floor with his son in his lap. "Klaus," he said, "do you want to hear about your great-grandfather, the man you were named after?" The boy nodded eagerly. "He was a very smart man who created a magic formula that helped people clean their homes. But more than that, he was an honest man who always told the truth." "What happened to him, Daddy?" "He trusted a friend who wasn't really a friend. That man took Great-Grandpa Klaus's magic formula and pretended he had created it." Little Klaus frowned. "That's stealing, right, Daddy?" "That's right, son. But do you know what happened many years later?" What? Your daddy found out the truth and fought for a very, very long time to show everyone that your great-grandpa Klaus was the real creator of the magic formula. And you did it, Daddy. I did, son. And now everyone knows Klaus Fischer was a good and brilliant man. The boy hugged Michael tightly. Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be like great-grandpa Klaus and like you. What do you want to be, son? I want to be honest and a fighter, the boy said with the adorable seriousness of small children. Michael's heart swelled with pride. The most important lesson had been passed on to the next generation. At that moment, Michael realized he had fulfilled every goal he had set during the long legal journey. He had brought justice to Klaus's memory, provided a dignified life for his mother, built a respected career, created a happy family, and ensured that the lessons of honesty and perseverance were passed on to his son. But perhaps most important of all was the fact that he had proven the values Klaus Fischer stood for. Honesty, generosity, trust in others were not signs of weakness, as Richard William had suggested that fateful night at the restaurant. They were signs of true strength. During Sunday lunch, with 3 generations of the family gathered around the table, Mrs. Grace, Michael, Anna Catherine, and little Klaus, Michael reflected on everything they had been through. Do you know what was the most important thing I learned throughout this journey? He asked. What? Asked Anna Catherine. That true wealth isn't in the money we earn. It's in the family we have, the friends who support us, the peace of mind of those who fight for what's right. Michael looked at each face around the table. Klaus Fischer was a rich man, even when he had no money, because he had character. He had values, he had love for his family. That's a far more valuable inheritance than any material fortune. Grace, now over 70, but still sharp and healthy, smiled at her son. Michael, your great-grandfather Klaus would be so proud of the man you've become. And I'm sure your grandmother Rose is watching over us from somewhere, happy to see our family together and at peace. After lunch, Michael sat in his favorite armchair in the living room, where he usually read legal cases and prepared his defenses. But that Sunday, he simply gazed at the view of the garden, where Anna Catherine played with little Klaus. Michael thought about how drastically his life had changed since that night at the Bellevue restaurant. From an invisible waiter for New York City's high society, he had become a respected and influential person. But what satisfied him most was knowing he had used that influence to help others. In 10 years of practicing law, Michael had won dozens of cases defending small inventors, artists, and business owners who had been wronged by big corporations. Each victory gave him the same satisfaction he had felt when he won his own case against the Harrisons. The Thompson & Miller law firm had become a reference in New York City for intellectual property and consumer protection cases. They maintained a policy of always taking at least 2 cases per month from people who couldn't afford legal fees. Anna, Michael said when his wife entered the room, do you think Klaus would be proud of what we've done with the compensation money? I'm sure he would, Anna Catherine replied. The research center has already developed dozens of products helping millions of people. The scholarships have allowed hundreds of young people to pursue their dreams. And you've used a significant portion to help other families who went through similar struggles. Michael nodded, satisfied. He and Anna Catherine had decided to use only a small part of the compensation for their personal needs. The rest had been invested in social and educational projects. Michael, Anna Catherine continued, there's something I've always wanted to ask you. During all that fight against the Harrisons, did you ever think of giving up? Michael reflected on the question. There were very hard moments, especially when they started harassing me and spreading lies about me. But whenever I thought of quitting, I remembered what my mother taught me as a child. What did she teach you? That doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And that when we fight for a just cause, we're never alone, even when it feels like we are. Anna Catherine sat on the armrest and ran her fingers through her husband's hair, and she was right. Look how many people came forward to help you during the process. Mrs. Eleanor, Dr. Charles, Sebastian, Mrs. Julia, Mrs. Margaret, even Richard William himself in the end. That's true. I think people have a natural instinct to support those fighting injustice. The hard part is finding the courage to start the fight. Michael stood and walked to the bookshelf, where he kept a framed photo of the family gathered on the day of the Klaus Fischer Research Center's opening. In the picture were him, Anna Catherine, Grace, Dr. Michael with the family, Mrs. Eleanor, and even Richard William with his wife and children. You know, Anna, sometimes I wonder how different things would be if I hadn't found that document in Grandma Rose's attic. What do you mean? Maybe I'd still be a waiter at Bellevue. Maybe my mother would still be taking expensive medications we could barely afford. Maybe I'd never have met you. Anna Catherine smiled. But you did find the document, and more importantly, you had the courage to do something about it. Thousands of people find evidence of injustices every day, but most don't have the courage to fight. Do you think it was courage? Sometimes I think it was just stubbornness. Michael, it was courage. Courage to stand up to one of the most powerful families in the country. Courage to endure public humiliation. Courage to keep fighting when everything seemed lost. Michael hugged his wife, grateful to have someone who understood the importance of what they'd been through together. That night, after Anna Catherine and little Klaus had gone to bed, Michael went to his home office and opened the safe where he kept the original documents that had changed his life. He still looked at them from time to time, not because he doubted their authenticity, but because he liked to connect with his family's history. Michael picked up Frederick Harrison's handwritten confession and read it once more. The words were still clear. Frederick admitted to using Klaus's formula without permission and expressed his guilt over the betrayal. "Klaus," Michael said, as if his great-grandfather could hear him, "thank you for being a man of integrity. Your honesty made it possible for the truth to come out 70 years later." Michael put the documents back in the safe and went to bed. Anna Catherine was already asleep, but he lay awake for a while, reflecting on the years that had passed since it all began. He thought of Richard William Harrison, who had gone from antagonist to ally. Richard William's change had been one of the biggest surprises of the entire journey. It showed that even the most arrogant people can learn and grow when confronted with the truth. Michael also thought of all the people who had been inspired by his story to fight for their own causes. He regularly received letters from people sharing how the Fisher family's story had motivated them not to give up on their own dreams of justice. One such letter had arrived the week before, from a teacher in a small town who was fighting to reclaim a school that had been illegally closed by the local government. She wrote, "Mr. Michael, whenever I think of giving up, I remember your fight against the Harrisons and find the strength to keep going." Messages like that always moved Michael deeply. He'd discovered that one of the best outcomes of his victory was the inspiring effect it had on others, facing their own battles against injustice. Michael finally fell asleep thinking about the next day, when he'd go to the Klaus Fischer Research Center for the monthly board meeting. As one of the founders, he was actively involved in deciding which projects to support and which research to fund. The next morning, Michael woke up early and went to the center before Anna Catherine and little Klaus were even up. He liked to arrive before the other board members to spend a few quiet moments alone in the main lab, where a large portrait of Klaus Fischer hung on the wall. "Good morning, Klaus," Michael said, as he did every time he visited the center. "We have some important decisions to make today. I hope you'll help me choose the projects you'd approve of." Michael reviewed the reports on the ongoing projects. The center was developing biodegradable cleaning products, researching water purification methods for underprivileged communities, and working on organic fertilizer formulas for small farmers. All the projects had one thing in common. They aimed to benefit ordinary people, not generate exorbitant profits for large corporations. It was exactly the kind of application Klaus would have given to his knowledge. During the board meeting, Michael proposed a new project, creating a research line specifically focused on developing products that could be manufactured and sold by worker cooperatives in low-income communities. The idea, Michael explained to the other board members, is to democratize not just access to the products, but also the ability to produce and market them. Richard William, who had become one of the center's main funders after the agreement, enthusiastically approved the proposal. "Michael, this is exactly the kind of project that justifies the center's existence. Klaus Fischer always cared about helping people in difficult situations. This project perfectly honors his memory." After the meeting, Michael and Richard William walked together across the center's campus. It was a beautiful landscape, with modern laboratories surrounded by well-kept gardens where researchers could relax between work sessions. "Michael," Richard Williams said, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Have you completely forgiven me for what I did during the process? For the humiliations, the harassment, the lies I made up about you?" Michael stopped walking and looked directly at Richard William. "Richard William, I forgave you the moment you acknowledged your mistakes and decided to make amends. Holding on to resentment would only hurt me." "But it wasn't easy to forgive, was it?" "No, it wasn't. There were moments when I felt a lot of anger, especially when you publicly questioned my character. But my mother taught me that forgiveness isn't a gift we give to those who hurt us. It's a gift we give ourselves." Richard William nodded, visibly moved. "Michael, you've taught me more about character in 5 years of friendship than I learned in 30 years of life before I met you." "Richard William, you've changed just as much as I have. The difference is that you had to change not only personally but also take responsibility for the mistakes of previous generations in your family. That takes a courage few have." They continued walking in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. "Michael," Richard William finally said, "there's something I've always wanted to tell you, but I never found the right moment." "What?" "That night at the restaurant when I challenged you to translate the document, part of me hoped you wouldn't succeed, but a small part, deep down, was rooting for you to do it." Michael was surprised. "What do you mean?" "Because, even though I was arrogant and prejudiced, I realized you were different from the other employees. There was something about your demeanor, the way you spoke, that intrigued me. When you translated the document perfectly, I felt a mix of humiliation and admiration. I never imagined that. The truth is, you fascinated me even before I found out who you really were. And that scared me because it meant I was wrong about so many things I believed." Michael reflected on this revelation. It was interesting to discover that even in the worst moments of their confrontation, there had been an underlying mutual respect. "Richard William, do you know when I truly began to respect you?" "No." "It was when you showed up at that celebration dinner at Bellevue with your children. You showed you were willing to use our story as a lesson for them. That demonstrated real humility. My children needed to understand that money and social status are not synonyms for moral worth. You were the best example I found to teach that lesson." When Michael came home that afternoon, he found Anna Catherine in the garden with little Klaus, who was planting flowers in a special bed they had made for him. "How was the meeting at the center?" asked Anna Catherine. "Productive. We approved. A new project that will help underprivileged communities produce their own cleaning supplies. Klaus would be proud." Michael sat on the grass beside his son. "Klaus, what are you planting?" "Yellow flowers, Daddy. Mommy said Great-Grandpa Klaus liked yellow." Michael smiled. Anna Catherine had researched Klaus Fischer and discovered through letters he had written in Germany that yellow was indeed his favorite color. "Do you want to help me take care of Great-Grandpa Klaus's flowers?" the boy asked. "Of course, son." Michael knelt beside the boy and began helping him with the planting. As they worked together in the soil, Michael reflected on how this simple moment represented everything he had achieved: a close-knit family, a dignified life, and the chance to pass down strong values to the next generation. "Daddy," little Klaus said, "when I grow up, I'm going to plant a whole garden of yellow flowers for Great-Grandpa Klaus." "Why, son?" "So he knows we still remember him and think he's important." Michael was moved by his son's innocence and wisdom. "Klaus, your great-grandfather already knows you remember him, and he's very happy about it." That evening after dinner, Michael got a call from Dr. Charles. "Michael, I have some interesting news for you." "What is it?" "I got a consultation from an Italian family who found old documents suggesting their great-grandmother invented a tomato sauce recipe that was stolen by a major food company in the 1940s. Michael laughed. "And they want us to take the case." "Exactly. They said they researched lawyers specializing in historical intellectual property cases and found we're the only ones in the country with experience proving theft of old formulas." "Dr. Charles, I think we found our specialty, huh? Seems like it. What do you think? Should we help another family reclaim their history? Michael didn't hesitate. Of course, Dr. Charles. If we can use our experience to help other families who went through what we did, it's our moral duty to do so. Great. I scheduled a meeting with them for Friday. The family's name is Ross, and they have some very interesting evidence about the case. After hanging up, Michael told Anna Catherine about the new case. She smiled, knowing her husband had found his true calling in life. Michael, do you realize you're becoming a sort of specialized advocate for families who were wronged in the past? It's a strange but good feeling. It's like Klaus is guiding me to help people who went through the same thing as our family. On Friday, Michael and Dr. Charles met with the Ross family at the office. 3 generations were present. The patriarch Joseph Ross, 85 years old, his daughter Mary Ross Sanders, 60, and her son Carl Sanders, 32. Joseph Ross told the story in a mix of English and Italian, his hands gesturing expressively. As he spoke, my grandma Lucy Ross came from England in 1938 with a secret tomato sauce recipe that had been passed down in our family for generations. It was a special sauce with a unique blend of herbs and spices. Carl, the grandson, continued the story. In 1942, my great-grandmother opened a small sauce factory in the Lower East Side. The product was an instant success. People lined up to buy Grandma Lucy's sauce. And what happened? Asked Dr. Charles. Mary Ross Sanders took a deep breath before answering. A businessman named Anthony Ferris offered to become partners with my grandma. He said he had the capital to expand production and the market knowledge to sell across the city. Michael was already seeing similarities with Klaus's story. My grandma trusted him, Mary continued. She was a simple woman who didn't understand contracts or paperwork. Anthony promised it would be an equal partnership. Joseph Ross pulled an old folder from his bag and spread yellow documents across the table. But Anthony was a swindler. When my grandma died in 1945, he forged papers claiming she had sold the recipe to him before passing. Our family was left with nothing. Dr. Charles examined the documents carefully. There were original contracts, handwritten letters, and even photos of the small original factory. And Anthony Ferris's company grew after that? Asked Michael. Grew? Absolutely, exclaimed Carl. Today, Ferris Foods is one of the largest sauce and preserves companies in the country, and they still use my great-grandmother's exact recipe. Michael felt the same outrage he had when he discovered Klaus's story. Do you have the original recipe? We do, said Mary, pulling a small, worn notebook from her bag. My grandma wrote everything by hand with every ingredient and exact measurement. Dr. Charles flipped through the notebook carefully. The pages were yellowed with age, but the handwriting was clear and legible. Joseph, have you tried any legal action before? We've tried several times over the years, the elderly man replied, but we were always told we didn't have enough evidence, that it was our family's word against a reputable company. Michael and Dr. Charles exchanged glances. It was exactly the same kind of discrimination they had faced with the Harrisons. Well, said Dr. Charles, based on our experience with the Fisher case, I'd say you have very solid evidence. This notebook, the original contracts, the factory photos, all of it could be crucial. Will you take the case? Carl asked eagerly. Absolutely, Michael replied without hesitation. But I need to be honest with you, it'll be a long, hard fight. Ferris Foods has a lot of money and influence. They'll try to discredit you, just like the Harrisons tried with me. Joseph Ross stood up with difficulty and extended his hand to Michael. Mr. Thompson, if you manage to beat the Harrisons, we trust you can help us too. In the following days, Michael and Dr. Charles began investigating the history of Ferris Foods. They discovered the company had followed a pattern similar to the Harrisons, meteoric growth based on a revolutionary product, always claiming the founder had created everything alone. Michael, Dr. Charles said during a meeting, I found something interesting. Anthony Ferris died in 1978, and at the time some newspapers published obituaries mentioning he had inherited culinary knowledge from an Italian partner. That's almost a public confession. Exactly. And there's more. His son, who took over the company, gave an interview in 1985 where he mentioned his father always spoke fondly of Grandma Lucy, who had taught him the secrets of Italian cooking. Michael was excited by the discoveries. Dr. Charles, they didn't even try to hide the truth completely. It's like they assumed no one from the Ross family would have the courage or resources to challenge them. Unfortunately, for decades they were right. But now we have the experience and credibility to take on this kind of case. As they prepared the Ross family's lawsuit, Michael received an unexpected call from Richard William Harrison. "Michael, I need to talk to you urgently. Can I stop by your office today?" "Of course, Richard William. Did something happen?" "I'd rather talk in person." Richard William arrived at the office an hour later, visibly agitated. Michael received him in his private office. "Michael, I heard you took the Ross family's case against Ferris Foods." "How did you know that?" "We haven't even filed the lawsuit yet. I have contacts in the business world. The news that the lawyers who brought down the Harrisons took on another historical intellectual property case spread quickly." Richard Williams sat down and sighed deeply. "Michael, I need to tell you something. My grandfather Frederick wasn't the only businessman of his time who appropriated others' creations." Michael leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Frederick was friends with Anthony Ferris. They knew each other from the club where businessmen gathered in the 40s. And Frederick once told me, when I was a teenager, that Anthony had learned from him how to take advantage of opportunities naive people let slip away." Michael felt his heart race. "Richard William, are you saying they shared methods for stealing other people's creations?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And there's more. My grandfather mentioned that Anthony had taken a recipe from a naive Italian woman in the 40s. Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I learned from you that hiding the truth only causes more suffering in the long run. And because the Ross family deserves justice just as much as your family did." Richard William took an envelope from the briefcase he was carrying. "Michael, I found this among my grandfather's old papers. It's a letter Anthony Ferris wrote to Frederick in 1946. Michael opened the letter with trembling hands. Anthony Ferris described in detail how he had managed to appropriate Lucy Ross's recipe and thanked Frederick for his valuable advice on dealing with inconvenient partners. "My God," Michael murmured. "This is a full confession." "Michael, I want you to use this letter to help the Ross family. It's the right thing to do." Michael was moved by Richard Williams' gesture. "Richard William, why did you keep this letter all these years?" "Because even as a child, I sensed something wrong in those conversations between my grandfather and Anthony. I kept the letter as proof in case I ever needed it. And now you're giving me this proof to use against a friend of your family." "Michael, Anthony Ferris has been dead for decades, but his children have continued living a lie just as I did. Maybe it's time they faced the truth too." When Dr. Charles saw the letter, he was elated. "Michael, this completely changes the Ross case. With this evidence, they can't deny stealing the recipe. Dr. Charles, I think we're discovering the problem was much bigger than we imagined. Frederick and Anthony weren't isolated cases." "What do you mean?" "There might have been a whole network of unscrupulous businessmen back then exchanging information on how to appropriate others' creations." Dr. Charles considered the possibility. "Michael, if that's true, there could be dozens of families who were harmed the same way. And there might still be evidence hidden in old archives." Michael had a bold idea. "Dr. Charles, what if we created a special project at the Klaus Fisher Research Center? A kind of historical archive dedicated to investigating cases of intellectual property theft in the United States? That would be revolutionary. We could help many families reclaim their histories. I'll talk to Richard William about it. I'm sure he'll support the project." The next day, Michael met with Richard William to discuss the historical archive idea. Richard William was enthusiastic. "Michael, this is an opportunity to rectify not just the mistakes of my family, but of an entire generation of dishonest businessmen. Richard, would you be willing to fund a project like this?" "I would, yes. And more. I'd be willing to donate all my family's old documents to the archive. even those that might tarnish the Harrisons' reputation. Michael was struck by Richard's complete transformation. "Why do you want to do this?" "Because I've learned that the truth sets you free. When I stopped defending my grandfather's lies, my life became much lighter and more authentic." A week later, Michael presented the proposal to the board of directors at the Klaus Fischer Research Center. The project was unanimously approved and named the Klaus Fischer Archive for Historical Justice. The idea, Michael explained during the presentation, is to create a database of historical cases of misappropriation, provide free legal counsel to families with evidence of harm, and educate the public on the importance of protecting intellectual property. Joseph Ross, who had been invited to the meeting, was moved to learn his family's case had inspired such a broad initiative. "My grandma Lucy would be so happy to know her story is helping other families," he said, with tears in his eyes. Meanwhile, Dr. Charles was finalizing preparations to file the Ross family's lawsuit. With Anthony Ferris's letter confessing to the theft of the recipe, the case became airtight. "Michael," Dr. Charles said, "I think this lawsuit will be easier than the Harrisons. The evidence is much more straightforward." "Do you think Ferris Foods will try to settle before going to court?" "Very likely. They must know they can't defend the indefensible." Dr. Charles was right. 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Ferris Foods lawyers reached out to propose negotiations. Michael, the company's lead attorney, said during the first negotiation meeting, "Our clients are willing to acknowledge past irregularities and offer compensation to the Ross family." "What kind of compensation?" Dr. Charles asked. "We're considering $5 million and a public acknowledgement of Lucy Ross's contribution to the original recipe." Michael looked at Joseph Ross, who was present at the meeting. "Joseph, what do you think of the offer?" The elderly Italian man paused before answering. "Mr. Michael, for my family, recognizing Grandma Lucy's work has always mattered more than money. If they publicly admit she created the recipe, I'll accept their compensation." "Then it's settled," Michael said. "But we want the acknowledgement to be part of a national advertising campaign, not just a small newspaper note." Ferris Foods lawyers agreed to the terms, and the settlement was finalized within a month. The Ross family not only received financial compensation, but also saw Lucy Ross's name honored in TV commercials and newspaper ads. "Michael," Joseph said during the agreement signing ceremony, "you've given our family back something we thought was lost forever, our dignity." The success of the Ross case drew national media attention. Michael began receiving calls from journalists eager to interview the historical justice attorney. During a TV interview, Michael explained his philosophy. "Many people think old. Cases no longer matter, that we should leave the past in the past, but the truth is injustices don't expire morally. If someone built a fortune based on stealing others' creations, that injustice remains alive as long as profits continue to be made." "But Mr. Michael," asked the interviewer, "don't you think some people might try to take advantage of your case's success to make up false stories?" "That's a risk that exists," Michael admitted. "That's why we investigate each case very carefully. We only take cases when we have solid, verifiable evidence." After the interview, Michael received over 200 calls from people wanting to report similar cases. Dr. Charles hired 2 new lawyers to help review all the claims. "Michael," said Dr. Charles, "I think we've created a monster. We had no idea how many American families have stories like yours and the Ross families." "Dr. Charles, this just shows the problem was much bigger than we imagined, and that there's a lot of work ahead." Among the most interesting cases that came to the firm was the story of a Japanese family who claimed to have developed an innovative orchid-growing technique stolen by an American businessman in the 1950s, and a German family who said they had created a revolutionary beer fermentation method appropriated by a major brewery. Michael and Dr. Charles selected 5 cases with the strongest evidence to investigate further. Each followed a similar pattern: immigrants or humble people who trusted American businessmen and were betrayed. "Michael," Dr. Charles observed, "it seems there really was a culture of appropriation among certain businessmen back then. They saw immigrants and ordinary people as easy targets. It's infuriating, but not surprising. Vulnerable people have always been exploited by those with more power. While investigating the new cases, Michael continued his family life. Little Klaus, now 4, was showing early curiosity about his father's work. "Daddy," Klaus asked during dinner, "why do you get mad when people steal ideas?" Michael smiled at his son's innocence. "Because when someone steals an idea, they're not just taking one thing. They're stealing a person's dream, their hard work, and the future they planned for their family." Like the man who stole great-grandpa Klaus's idea. "Exactly, son. That's why it's important to always stand up for people who've been wronged." Hannah Catherine, watching the conversation, felt proud seeing how Michael was instilling strong values in their son. "Michael," she said later, "do you realize Klaus is growing up seeing you as a hero who defends the weak? I hope he grows up wanting to help others too. That would be the best legacy I could leave him." A few months later, Michael got a surprising call. It was from Dr. Frank Morrison, one of Richard Williams' friends who had been there that fateful night at Belle View Restaurant. "Michael, I'd like to talk to you about a personal matter. Can I come to your office?" Michael was curious but agreed to meet. Dr. Frank arrived the next day, visibly nervous. "Michael, first I want to apologize for my behavior that night. At the restaurant, I was wrong to support Richard William when he tried to humiliate you." "Dr. Frank, that's in the past. Richard William and I are friends now." "Yes, I know, and that's why I found the courage to reach out. I need your help." Michael leaned forward, intrigued. "How can I help?" Dr. Frank took a deep breath before continuing. "My maternal grandfather, Dr. Joseph Morrison, was a doctor and inventor. In the 1930s, he developed a revolutionary method for sterilizing surgical instruments that saved thousands of lives. And what's the problem? The method was stolen by one of his colleagues, Dr. Augustus Smith, who patented it under his own name. My grandfather could never prove he had created the method first." Michael Anthony Thompson felt as if he were hearing echoes of all the stories he had investigated over the past few months. "Dr. Frank, do you have evidence of this appropriation?" "I have my grandfather's original research notebooks, letters exchanged between them, and most importantly, a diary where Dr. Augustus Smith confesses to stealing the method." "A diary?" "Yes, Dr. Augustus Smith was an alcoholic, and when he drank too much, he would write confessions in his diary. My family gained access to it after he died because my father was his widow's lawyer." Michael was fascinated by yet another case following the same pattern. "Dr. Frank, why didn't you ever try to seek justice before?" "Because I was afraid of tarnishing my own medical reputation. Dr. Augustus Smith became a legend in American medicine. I thought no one would believe he was a fraud. And now? Now I've seen how you proved that Frederick Harrison, one of the most respected businessmen in the country, was a fraud. If you could do that, maybe you can help me too." Michael was moved by Dr. Frank's trust. "Dr. Frank, would you be willing to take on the entire American medical community to get justice for your grandfather?" "I would. My grandfather deserves for the truth to be known." Michael took the case, and Dr. Charles was thrilled when he heard the details. "Michael, this case could be even bigger than the previous ones. Dr. Augustus Smith has a hospital, a research institute, even a medical school named after him. I can only imagine the medical community's reaction when they find out their idol was a plagiarist. It's going to be a tough battle, but if we can prove it, it'll send a powerful message across the country." While Dr. Charles prepared Dr. Frank's case, Michael received an unexpected visitor at the office. Anna Beth Harrison, Richard Williams' daughter. "Mr. Thompson," the 19-year-old said, "I need to talk to you about my father." Michael grew concerned. "Annabeth, is something wrong with Richard William?" "No, he's fine, but I'm worried about him." "Why?" "Ever since you two became friends, my father has changed completely. He's obsessed with making up for our family's past mistakes." Annabeth sat in the chair across from Michael's desk. "Mr. Thompson, my father is spending millions of dollars on social projects, donating historical documents that could damage our reputation, and even considering changing the company name to remove Harrison." Michael began to understand the young woman's concern. "Annabeth, do you think your father is going too far?" I think he's punishing himself for crimes he didn't commit. My father didn't steal your great-grandfather's formula. It was my great-grandfather Frederick. But your father spent decades defending that lie. Because he believed it. My father always thought the formula had been legitimately created by his grandfather. When he found out the truth, he was devastated. Michael considered Annabeth's words. She had a point. Annabeth, what would you like me to do? I'd like you to talk to him. Help him find a balance between making amends for the past and not destroying everything our family has legitimately built. Michael promised to speak with Richard William, and a few days later they met for lunch. Richard William, Annabeth came to see me. She's worried about you. Richard William sighed. Michael, ever since I learned the truth about my grandfather, I've felt overwhelming guilt. How could I have spent so many years defending a lie? Richard William, you had no way of knowing you were defending a lie. Your parents and grandparents told you their version of events and you believed them. But you should have investigated. You should have questioned. Michael placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Richard William, you can't carry the guilt for crimes you didn't commit. What matters is that when you discovered the truth, you had the courage to face it and make amends. But I feel I need to do more, Michael. I feel I owe a debt to all the families harmed by businessmen like my grandfather. Richard William, you've already done so much. The Klaus Fischer Research Center, the Archive for Historical Justice, the donations to affected families. You've made far more reparations than were required. Michael paused, choosing his words carefully. Richard William, Annabeth is right. You can't destroy everything your family legitimately built just because of past mistakes. You have employees, responsibilities, a daughter who's proud of the transformation you've made. Richard William reflected on Michael's words. Do you think I'm overdoing it? I think you're being too hard on yourself. The important thing is to find balance, acknowledge and repair past wrongs, but also value the good things that were built legitimately. This conversation helped Richard William find a healthier balance. He continued supporting historical justice projects, but stopped excessively blaming himself for the crimes of past generations. Meanwhile, Dr. Frank's case was gaining momentum. Michael and Dr. Charles had found additional evidence that Dr. Augustus Smith had indeed appropriated the sterilization method created by Dr. Joseph Morrison. Michael, said Dr. Charles, I found a letter Dr. Augustus Smith wrote to a colleague in 1935 where he mentions learning innovative techniques from a talented young doctor. Does that refer to Dr. Joseph? Most likely, and there's more. The method was first published in 1936, but I found notes in Dr. Joseph's journal dated 1934. So we have proof Dr. Joseph developed the method first. Exactly. And with Dr. Augustus Smith's confessional diary, we have evidence he knew he was appropriating something he didn't create. When Michael and Dr. Charles filed the lawsuit, the medical community's reaction was explosive. Dr. Augustus Smith was considered a pioneer of American medicine, and questioning his integrity was nearly sacrilegious. Michael, Dr. Frank said after the first hearing, I'm getting calls from colleagues accusing me of betraying the medical profession. Dr. Frank, did you expect this reaction? I expected it, but not this intense. Some colleagues are threatening to sue me for defamation, Michael reassured Dr. Frank. This is normal in cases that challenge established icons. They're trying to intimidate you into giving up before the truth comes out. The lawsuit against Dr. Augustus Smith's heirs lasted 6 months. During this time, Michael and Dr. Charles faced a systematic smear campaign from parts of the medical community who saw the case as an attack on a medical hero's legacy. But the evidence was irrefutable. Experts confirmed Dr. Joseph's notebooks were authentic and predated Dr. Augustus Smith's publication of the method. The confessional diary was verified as genuine through handwriting analysis. Your Honor, Michael said during his closing arguments, this case isn't an attack on American medicine. It's a defense of scientific integrity. Science only progresses when we give proper credit to the true discoverers. The judge ruled in Dr. Frank's favor, recognizing Dr. Joseph Morrison as the true creator of the sterilization method. Dr. Augustus Smith's family was ordered to pay compensation and publish historical corrections in medical journals. "Michael," said Dr. Frank after the victory, "my grandfather finally received the recognition he deserved. Thank you for making this possible." The case of Dr. Frank established Michael as a lawyer capable of taking on not just powerful businessmen but also established cultural icons. This brought even more attention to his work. During a conference on intellectual property at Columbia University, Michael was questioned about his methods. "Mr. Thompson," asked a professor, "don't you think it's dangerous to challenge respected historical figures based solely on documentary evidence?" "Professor," Michael replied, "what's truly dangerous is accepting historical narratives without critical questioning. If we have evidence that an injustice was committed, we have a moral obligation to investigate, regardless of the accused's social status." Michael continued, "History is full of examples of people who were unjustly forgotten while their exploiters were celebrated. Our duty is to correct these distortions when we have the evidence to do so." After the conference, several law students approached Michael, offering to work as interns at his firm. He was moved by the young people's interest. "Dr. Charles," Michael said, "I think we're inspiring a new generation of lawyers interested in historical justice." "Michael, this might be your greatest legacy. Not just the cases we win, but the people we inspire to fight for justice." Michael decided to create an internship program specializing in historical intellectual property cases. 5 law students were selected to work part-time at the firm, learning how to investigate old cases and handle historical evidence. "The idea," Michael explained to the interns on their first day, "is to train a new generation of lawyers specializing in correcting past injustices. You'll learn not just law but also history, documentary research, and technical expertise." Mary Sanders, a 22-year-old student, asked, "Mr. Thompson, what's the biggest challenge in historical cases?" "The biggest challenge, Mary, is convincing people that old injustices still matter. Many believe we should let the past stay in the past. But the truth is, unresolved injustices continue to harm the affected families." Over the following months, the interns helped Michael and Dr. Charles investigate dozens of cases. Not all became lawsuits, but each investigation contributed to the Klaus Fischer archive and the understanding of patterns of misappropriation in the United States. One of the most compelling cases the interns helped uncover was that of the Nakamura family. Kenji Nakamura had developed an innovative soybean cultivation technique in the 1940s, but was forced to hand it over to an American farmer who threatened to deport him during World War II. Mr. Thompson, Hiroshi Nakamura, Kenji's grandson, shared, "My grandfather never spoke about this because he was afraid. Back then, Japanese people in the United States lived in constant fear of persecution." Michael was deeply moved by the story. "Hiroshi, your grandfather was a victim not just of intellectual theft, but of xenophobia and blackmail. That makes this case even more serious. Do you think we have any chance of securing reparations after so many years?" "Hiroshi, if we have solid evidence, there's always a chance. And more importantly, your family deserves to have the truth known." The Nakamura case revealed a troubling pattern. During World War II, many Japanese immigrants had been forced to surrender their inventions and techniques to Americans who threatened to report them to authorities. "Michael," Dr. Charles said, "I think we've uncovered a very dark chapter of American history. These weren't just isolated cases of appropriation, but a systematic persecution of vulnerable immigrants." "Dr. Charles, this goes beyond individual cases. It's a historical pattern that needs to be officially documented and recognized." Michael decided to reach out to Richard William to discuss expanding the Klaus Fischer archive to include a special section on immigrant persecution during World War II. "Richard William," Michael said over lunch, "we've discovered the problem was much larger than we imagined. There was systematic persecution of Japanese, German, Italian immigrants. All were forced to hand over their creations to Americans who threatened them." Richard William was outraged. "This is terrible, Michael. It's a stain on US history that needs to be exposed and acknowledged. Would you support creating a memorial dedicated to these victims?" "I would absolutely support it. In fact, I think we should approach the state government to make this an official historical reparations project." Michael was surprised by the suggestion. Do you really think the government would agree to a project like this? Michael, you've become a respected public figure. If you propose a serious, well-founded project, I'm sure you'll find support. Michael's idea evolved into an ambitious project, creating the first memorial to victims of intellectual appropriation in America, which would include not just individual cases, but also historical patterns of persecution and exploitation. The EE's idea, Michael explained to the State Secretary of Culture, is to create an educational space where people can learn about the importance of protecting intellectual property and the harm caused by historical misappropriation. The Secretary showed interest in the project. Mr. Thompson, this would be groundbreaking in the US. I don't know of any memorial specifically dedicated to this kind of injustice. That's exactly why it's important, Secretary. These stories must be preserved so similar mistakes aren't repeated. The memorial project was approved and received joint funding from the state government, private initiatives led by Richard William, and donations from families who had benefited from Michael's work. While the memorial was being planned, Michael continued taking on individual cases. One of the most moving was that of the Silver family, descendants of a composer who had created several popular songs in the 1950s, only for them to be appropriated by a famous singer. Mr. Thompson, said Anthony Silver, the composer's son, my father, Sebastian Silver, was a talented musician who wrote songs for community celebrations. A famous singer at the time, Raymond Cardwell, heard the songs and decided to record them as his own. Do you have proof your father created them first? We have the original sheet music handwritten by my father, and we have witnesses who heard the songs years before Raymond Cardwell recorded them. Dr. Charles analyzed the case with interest. Michael, this case is interesting because it involves artistic intellectual property, which differs from scientific or industrial intellectual property. That's true, and it could set a precedent for other artists exploited throughout history. The Silver case was particularly difficult because Raymond Cardwell had become an icon of American music, and questioning the authorship of his most famous songs was controversial. But the evidence was solid. Sebastian Silver's handwritten sheet music predated Raymond Cardwell's recordings, and multiple witnesses confirmed hearing the songs before they became famous. Michael, Anthony Silver said during the proceedings, it's not just about the money. It's a matter of honoring my father's memory, who died poor and unknown, while another man grew rich and famous from his creations. The music lawsuit drew national attention and divided opinions. Fans of Raymond Cardwell defended their idol, while others supported the Silver family's fight for recognition. During an interview for a television program, Michael explained his position. We're not trying to destroy Raymond Cardwell's legacy. We're trying to give proper credit to the true creator of these songs. It's possible to honor both Raymond Cardwell as the performer and Sebastian Silver as the composer. The solution came through a settlement where Raymond Cardwell's heirs recognized Sebastian Silver as the composer of the songs and agreed to split the retroactive royalties with the Silver family. Michael, said Anthony Silver after the agreement, my father finally got the recognition he deserved. Thank you so much for never giving up on our cause. Every case Michael won strengthened his reputation and brought in new clients. But it also came with growing responsibilities. He became a national authority on historical intellectual property cases, and people from across the country sought his help. Michael, said Anna Catherine one evening, you're becoming a national figure. How do you feel about that responsibility? It's a big responsibility, Anna. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed. But when I see families like the Ross family, the Nakamuras and the Silvers regain their dignity, I know it's worth it. And little Klaus? How is he handling his father's fame? He's still too young to fully understand, but I can tell he's proud of what I do. Yesterday he told me that when he grows up, he wants to help people like Daddy. Michael was moved remembering the conversation with his son. Anna, sometimes I wonder if I'm setting the right example for Klaus. Is he growing up thinking, life is just about conflicts and legal battles? Michael, Klaus is growing up seeing that it's possible to fight for justice and win. That's a valuable lesson. Anna Catherine hugged her husband. Michael, You're building a legacy that goes far beyond the cases you win. You're showing an entire generation that it's possible to stand up to injustice, no matter how powerful those responsible may be. On the 5th anniversary of the final ruling in the Fisher case, Michael organized a special gathering with all the families he had helped over the years. The meeting took place at the Klaus Fischer Research Center and was an emotional occasion. Joseph Ross, now 90 years old but still sharp, gave a speech on behalf of all the families. "Mr. Thompson, when we first came to you, we were forgotten families with stories no one believed. You gave us a voice, you gave us dignity, you gave us justice." Michael was moved seeing so many people gathered. "You've given me far more than I've given you," he replied. "You've taught me that one person's courage can make a difference in so many lives." During the celebration, Richard William approached Michael. "Michael, 5 years ago I was your enemy. Today you're one of my closest friends. That shows people can change when faced with the truth." "Richard William, you changed because you wanted to. Not everyone has that courage." "Michael, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Have you ever thought about going into politics? With your reputation and ideals, you could do so much good for so many people." Michael laughed. "Richard William, politics has never interested me. I'd rather keep helping people through the law. But you could have a bigger impact through public policy. Maybe, but I'd also lose my independence to take on the cases I want and fight for the causes I believe in." Michael paused, reflecting. "Richard William, I've learned that everyone has their own role to play in society. My role is to be a lawyer, to defend wronged families, and to inspire others to fight for justice. I don't need to be a politician to make a difference." During the celebration, Michael also announced a new initiative, the creation of the Klaus Fischer Foundation for Historical Justice, which would provide permanent free legal counsel to families with evidence of having been harmed by intellectual appropriation. "The foundation," Michael explained, "will be funded by a percentage of the settlements we secure and by voluntary donations. The goal is to ensure no family is prevented from seeking justice due to lack of financial resources." Dr. Charles, who had become a full partner to Michael, was named executive director of the foundation. "Michael," Dr. Charles said, "when we first started working together on your case, I never imagined it would turn into a national movement. Dr. Charles, you were essential to all of this. Without your expertise and dedication, I never would have won even the first case." The Klaus Fischer Foundation quickly became a national reference. In its first year of operation, it reviewed over 500 cases and agreed to represent 30 families with solid evidence of intellectual appropriation. One of the most impactful cases was that of the Parker family, who discovered documents proving their ancestor had invented a specific type of agricultural plow that was appropriated by an international company in the early 20th century. "Mr. Michael," John Parker shared, "my great-grandfather was a self-taught inventor who created innovative farming tools. A foreign company took interest in his plow, conducted some tests, and then patented it in another country, as if it were their own creation. Do you have evidence of this appropriation?" "We have my great-grandfather's original technical drawings, correspondence with the foreign company, and witnesses who saw the prototypes working years before the patent was filed." The Parker case was especially complex because it involved international law and a company operating in multiple countries. Michael had to hire attorneys specialized in international law to assist with the case. "Michael," Dr. Charles said, "this case could set important precedents for intellectual appropriation cases with international elements." "That's true, and it could pave the way for many other American families who have been harmed by foreign companies." The lawsuit lasted 2 years and involved courts in the United States and abroad. Finally, the international company agreed to acknowledge the invention's true origin and pay compensation to the Parker family. "Michael, John," Parker said after the victory, "my great-grandfather was a simple man from the countryside who never imagined his creation would be used worldwide. Now at last, he's received the recognition he deserved." The success of the Parker case drew international attention to Michael's work. He began receiving invitations to speak at intellectual property conferences in other countries. Michael. Anna Catherine said, "You're becoming a global figure. How does that feel?" "It's surreal, Anna. When I started this journey, I only wanted justice for my great-grandfather Klaus. I never imagined it would grow into something so big." "Do you think Klaus would be proud?" "I'm certain he would. Klaus was a man who believed in justice and solidarity. Knowing his story inspired a movement to help other families would have been his greatest joy." Michael decided to accept an invitation to speak at an international intellectual property conference in England. It would be his first work-related trip abroad. "Anna," Michael said, "I'd like you and Klaus to come with me to England. We could take the opportunity to visit some of the places Klaus Fischer had been before coming to the United States." "Michael, that would be wonderful. Klaus is at the perfect age to travel, and it would be a chance to connect him with his family roots." The trip to England was emotional for the whole family. Michael gave his presentation at the conference, sharing the story of Klaus Fischer and explaining how it had inspired a national movement for historical justice in the United States. "The most important lesson I've learned," Michael told the international audience, "is that injustice knows no nationality. In every country, there are families who have been harmed by intellectual appropriation, and they all deserve the chance to fight for justice." After the conference, Michael visited historical archives in England and uncovered more details about Klaus Fischer's life in Europe before emigrating to the United States. "Anna," Michael said when he found a document with Klaus's name, "it's thrilling to learn more about his life. Klaus truly was an exceptional man, respected by fellow chemists in Europe." Little Klaus, now 6 years old, was fascinated to learn he was visiting places his great-grandfather had been. "Daddy," Klaus asked, "did great-grandpa Klaus walk on these same streets we're walking on?" "Most likely, son. He lived in England for a few months before leaving for the United States. Would he be happy to know we're here?" Michael was moved by the question. "He'd be very happy, Klaus, and he'd be especially happy to know you're learning about your history." Back in the United States, Michael returned to his work at the foundation with renewed energy. The trip had given him a global perspective on the importance of his mission. "Dr. Charles," Michael said, "I realized in England that our work has the potential to inspire similar movements in other countries." "How so?" "I met lawyers from several countries dealing with cases like ours. They all face the same struggles: families harmed without resources, powerful companies that prefer to hide the truth, societies reluctant to question established icons." Michael had an ambitious idea. "Dr. Charles, what if we created an international network of lawyers specializing in historical justice? We could exchange experiences, share methodologies, and support each other in complex cases." "Michael, that would be revolutionary. It would be the first global initiative dedicated specifically to correcting historical injustices in intellectual property." The idea evolved into the creation of the Klaus Fischer International Network, with lawyers from 15 countries working collaboratively on cases of historical intellectual appropriation. This network, Michael explained at the launch, will ensure families in any country have access to specialized legal expertise, regardless of their financial situation. Richard William once again offered to fund part of the project. "Michael," he said, "Klaus Fischer has become a global symbol of intellectual integrity. It's only fitting that an international network bears his name." The launch of the network coincided with the 10th anniversary of the first hearing in the Fischer case. Michael organized a special ceremony at the Klaus Fischer Research Center, attended by American families who had been helped and international lawyers who had joined the network. During the ceremony, Michael gave a reflective speech. 10 years ago, I was just a waiter who found an old document in my grandmother's attic. Today, I'm here celebrating an international network dedicated to historical justice." Michael paused, emotional. This was only possible because so many people believed that truth matters more than power, that justice is worth more than money, and that the dignity of an ordinary family is just as valuable as the reputation of a powerful corporation. Michael looked at his mother, Grace, now nearly 80 years old, but still present and lucid. "My mother always taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy. but it's always worth it. She was right. Michael turned to Anna Catherine and Klaus, now 7 years old and beginning to understand the importance of his father's work. My family taught me that our greatest wealth isn't in the money we have, but in the character we build and the people we help along the way. Finally, Michael looked at Richard William, who had become one of the best friends he'd ever had. I've learned that even enemies can become allies when faced with the truth. I've learned that the courage to admit mistakes is one of the most admirable qualities a person can have. At the end of the ceremony, Michael visited the grave of his grandmother Rose, as he always did on important dates. He brought a wreath of flowers and a copy of the newspaper article that had been published about the creation of the international network. "Grandma Rose," Michael said, "Klaus has become known all over the world. His story is inspiring. Families in 15 countries to fight for justice. You and Klaus can rest in peace knowing your work wasn't in vain." Michael placed the newspaper on the headstone and stood silently for a few minutes, reflecting on the incredible journey he had lived. When he returned home, he found Klaus playing in the garden with the yellow flowers he planted every year in honor of his great-grandfather. "Daddy," Klaus said when he saw Michael approaching, "I planted new flowers for great-grandpa Klaus. They'll be even prettier than last year's." "Why do you plant flowers for him every year, Klaus?" "Because I want him to know we haven't forgotten him, and because you taught me that good people deserve to be remembered with love." Michael knelt beside his son and hugged him. "Klaus, you're growing up to be a very special boy. I'm sure you'll do many good things in life. Daddy, when I grow up, I want to help people like you do." "And what do you want to do to help people?" Klaus thought for a moment, with the adorable seriousness of children. "I want to discover new things that can help everyone, like great-grandpa Klaus did." Michael was moved, realizing Klaus had understood the heart of their family's story. It wasn't about money or fame, but about using talents to benefit others. "Klaus, if you grow up with that mindset, you'll make great-grandpa Klaus very proud." That night, Michael and Anna Catherine talked about the future. "Michael," Anna Catherine said, "have you thought about what things will be like 10 years from now? Klaus will be a teenager. The foundation will be well established. Maybe you'll have resolved hundreds of cases." "Anna, I hope. In 10 years, Klaus will be a young man who understands the importance of fighting for justice. I hope the foundation has helped thousands of families, and I hope I'll still have the energy to keep making a difference." "And personally, what do you hope for our family?" Michael smiled. "I hope we stay close, that Klaus grows up with strong values, that you'll still be my partner through everything. And I hope we can have more children to give Klaus siblings." Anna Catherine smiled. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you." "What? I'm pregnant." Michael was stunned for a few seconds, then burst with joy. "Really? We're having another baby?" "We are. I just confirmed it with the doctor this morning." Michael hugged Anna Catherine and spun her around the room. "Anna, this is wonderful. Klaus is going to have a little brother." "Or sister," Anna Catherine corrected, laughing. "That's true. Whether it's a boy or girl, they'll grow up in a family that values honesty, justice, and kindness." When they shared the news with Klaus, he was thrilled. "I'm going to teach my brother so many things. I'll teach about great-grandfather Klaus, about the yellow flowers, about helping people." Michael was moved to see his son's enthusiasm. "Klaus, you're going to be a wonderful big brother." A few months later, Michael received a surprising phone call. It was from Mary Sanders, the student who had interned at his law firm and was now graduating from law school. "Mr. Michael, I'd like to propose something to you." "What is it, Mary?" "I'd like to write my thesis on the social impact of the historical justice cases you've been working on." "Mary, that would be very interesting. But do you have access to the necessary data?" "I do, sir. I worked on several of the cases as an intern, and I'd like to analyze not just the legal aspects, but also the psychological and social impact on the families who benefited." Michael was excited by the proposal. "Mary, this would be crucial for documenting the importance of this kind of work. I'd be happy to collaborate on your research." Mary's thesis became a groundbreaking study on the effects of correcting historical injustices on family dignity and social cohesion. She interviewed all the families Michael had helped and documented significant changes in self-esteem, future prospects, and family relationships. "Mr. Michael," Mary said when presenting her findings, "I've discovered that your work has impacts that go far beyond financial compensation. The families report regaining not just money, but above all, dignity and family pride." "Mary, this confirms something I've always suspected, that historical injustice causes deep wounds that go beyond material losses." "Exactly. And correcting these injustices has profound therapeutic effects. Many families said their children began to take more pride in their origins after the historical reparations." Mary's thesis was published as a book and became an academic reference on restorative justice and historical reparations. Michael wrote the foreword. "This book documents something I sensed but had never seen scientifically proven, that doing justice for the past has the power to transform the present. Every family that reclaims its true history reconnects with its identity and finds strength to build a better future." Meanwhile, Anna Catherine was in her 7th month of pregnancy, and the whole family was eagerly awaiting the new baby. "Michael," Anna Catherine said during dinner, "have we thought about names? If it's a girl, I'd like to name her Rose after my grandmother. And if it's a boy..." Michael thought for a moment. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him Joseph, after Dr. Joseph Morrison, one of the victims we helped bring justice to." Anna Catherine smiled. "That's perfect. Whether it's Rose or Joseph, it'll be a name with history and meaning." Klaus joined the conversation. "Daddy, if it's a sister, can I teach her about great-grandfather Klaus's flowers?" "Of course, son. And if it's a brother, you two can take care of the flowers together." One Saturday morning, Michael received an urgent call from Dr. Charles. "Michael, I need you to come to the office right away. There's a case that will interest you greatly." "What happened, Dr. Charles?" "I'd rather explain in person. But I can tell you it involves a historical discovery that could change our understanding of several cases we've investigated." Michael went straight to the office, where he found Dr. Charles speaking with an elderly woman he didn't recognize. "Michael," Dr. Charles said, "this is Mrs. Helen Ferris, granddaughter of Anthony Ferris, the man who stole the Ross family's recipe." Michael was surprised. "Mrs. Helen, how can I help you?" "Mr. Michael," the woman said nervously, "I found documents in my grandfather's attic that might interest you." "What kind of documents?" Mrs. Helen opened an old folder and spread papers across the table. "These are letters, diaries, and notes that show my grandfather wasn't acting alone. He was part of a group of businessmen who met regularly to exchange information on how to appropriate others' creations." Michael felt his heart race. "An organized group?" "Yes. They had a system. They identified immigrants or humble people with valuable creations, gained their trust, and then took their work through fraudulent contracts or intimidation." Dr. Charles examined the documents carefully. "Michael, if this is true, we're talking about a historical conspiracy much larger than we imagined." Mrs. Helen continued, "Mr. Thompson, my grandfather recorded everything in detail. There are names of dozens of victims, descriptions of the methods used, even how profits were divided among the group members." Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Mrs. Helen, why are you bringing this to us?" "Because I saw what you did for the Ross family. I saw how happy they were when the truth about Grandma Lucy came out. My family built its fortune on lies, and I want to make things right." Michael was moved by Mrs. Helen's courage. "Mrs. Helen, do you realize these revelations could drastically affect your own family?" "I do. But I can't live knowing our wealth came from the suffering of so many innocent families." Mrs. Helen's documents revealed an organized network of intellectual appropriation that operated in the United States between 1940 and 1960. The group included Frederick Harrison, Anthony Ferris, and over 20 other businessmen who systematically stole creations from immigrants and vulnerable people. "Michael," Dr. Charles said, "this is much bigger than anything we've ever investigated. We're talking about dozens of families who were wronged." "Dr. Charles, this means there's so much more work to be done. So many more injustices to correct." Michael felt both excited and overwhelmed by the discovery. "Mrs. Helen," Michael said, "would you be willing to testify officially about these documents?" "I would, and more. I'd like to use part of my family's inheritance to help the victims we can identify. Michael was touched by Mrs. Helen's generosity. Mrs. Helen, that shows admirable courage and integrity. Mr. Thompson, it's the least I can do. My family benefited for decades from crimes my grandfather committed. It's time to repair that damage. The discovery of Mrs. Helen's documents marked the beginning of a new phase in Michael's work. Now he had evidence of a historical conspiracy that had affected hundreds of families over 2 decades. "Anna," Michael said at home that night, "we discovered something incredible today. The case of Klaus and the Ross family was just the tip of the iceberg." "What do you mean?" "There was an organized network of businessmen who systematically stole creations from immigrants and humble people. We have evidence of dozens of cases." Anna Catherine, now 8 months pregnant, grew concerned. "Michael, this means much more work, much more pressure, much more responsibility." "It does, but it also means we can help many more families reclaim their dignity." "Michael, promise me you won't overextend yourself. We have a baby coming, we have Klaus to care for, we have our own family to think about." Michael hugged his wife. "Anna, I promise I'll keep a balance. But I also can't ignore a discovery of this magnitude." The following week, Michael and Dr. Charles began investigating the names mentioned in Mrs. Helen's documents. They discovered many of the victimized families were still alive and scattered across the country. "Michael," Dr. Charles said. "Charles, we're going to need a much larger team to handle all these cases. Dr. Charles, I think the time has come to significantly expand the foundation." Michael decided to organize a press conference to reveal the discovery of the historical network of intellectual appropriation. The news caused a national uproar. "What we've uncovered," Michael told the journalists, "are not isolated cases of dishonesty, but an organized conspiracy that operated for decades, harming hundreds of American families." "Mr. Thompson," one reporter asked, "how many families may have been affected?" "Based on the documents we've analyzed so far, we estimate at least 200 families were directly harmed, but the actual number could be much higher." The revelation of the historical conspiracy sparked mixed reactions. Some business families tried to deny their ancestors' involvement, while others, inspired by Richard William and Mrs. Helen, chose to cooperate with the investigations. "Michael," Richard Williams said in a meeting, "this is going to be much bigger than anything we've ever faced. You need institutional support." "What do you mean?" "Michael, I think it's time to seek government backing to create an official commission for historical reparations." Richard Williams' idea evolved into the creation of the National Commission for Reparations for Historical Intellectual Appropriation, which received support from the federal government and several civil society organizations. The commission, Michael explained during the launch, will have the authority to officially investigate cases of historical appropriation and recommend appropriate reparations for the affected families. Michael was appointed chairman of the commission, with Dr. Charles as vice chairman and a team of historians, lawyers, and technical experts. 2 days before the commission's first official meeting, Anna Catherine went into labor. Michael rushed to the hospital, where he spent the entire night by her side for the birth of their second child. "Michael," Anna Catherine said after the delivery, "we have a beautiful, healthy daughter." Michael held the baby in his arms, overcome with emotion. "Rose," he said softly, "welcome to the Fisher family." Klaus, who had been anxiously waiting, was delighted with his little sister. "Daddy, she's so tiny. When can I teach her about Great-Grandpa Klaus?" Michael laughed. "Klaus, you'll have plenty of time to teach Rose all about our family." Mrs. Grace, now a great-grandmother, held her granddaughter with tears in her eyes. "Michael," she said, "your grandmother Rose would have been so happy to know her name lives on in her great-granddaughter." "Mom, I think we've come full circle. The first Rose in our family kept Klaus's secrets. The new Rose will grow up knowing the whole truth about our history." The following week, even while still recovering, Anna Catherine insisted on accompanying Michael to the commission's first official meeting. "Michael," she said, "this is a historic moment. I want to be there when you officially take your place as chairman." The first meeting of the National Commission for Reparations for Historical Intellectual Appropriation took place in the auditorium of the Klaus Fischer Research Center. Present were representatives from affected families, lawyers, historians, and government officials. This commission, Michael said in his inaugural speech, represents a milestone in the history of American justice. For the first time, our country officially acknowledges that historical injustices in intellectual property have caused lasting harm and deserve reparations. Michael continued, "Our work won't be easy. We'll investigate complex cases, face powerful resistance, and make difficult decisions. But we will always be guided by the principles of truth, justice, and human dignity." In the months that followed, the Commission investigated over 100 cases of historical appropriation. Some were confirmed and resulted in significant reparations, others were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. One of the most moving cases was that of the Tanaka family, descendants of a Japanese inventor who had developed an innovative silk production technique before World War II. "Mr. Michael," Keiko Tanaka shared, "my grandfather was forced to hand over all his technical secrets to an American businessman who threatened to report him as a Japanese spy. Do you have evidence of this extortion?" "We have the original technical documents handwritten by my grandfather, as well as letters in which the American businessman admits to using threats to obtain the information." The Tanaka case was one of the clearest examples of xenophobic extortion investigated by the Commission. The family received substantial reparations and official recognition. "Michael," Keiko said after the decision, "my grandfather died believing he had betrayed his family by surrendering the secrets. Now we know he was a victim of blackmail." Cases like the Tanakas reinforce the importance of the Commission's work, not just to provide financial compensation, but to restore the dignity of families who had carried undeserved guilt for decades. On the Commission's first anniversary, Michael reflected on their progress. "In 1 year, we investigated 127 cases, confirmed wrongful appropriation in 89 of them, and provided reparations totaling over $500 million to affected families. But," he continued, "the most important impact can't be measured in money. It's the recovered stories, the restored dignities, the families who have reconciled with their past." During the anniversary ceremony, several families shared heartfelt testimonies. Joseph Ross, now 92, spoke on behalf of them all. "Mr. Michael, you didn't just return money to our families. You returned our identity, our pride, our true history." Little Rose Fisher, now 1 year old, was present at the ceremony, sleeping peacefully in Anna Catherine's arms. Klaus, 8 years old, watched everything with growing interest. "Daddy," Klaus asked afterward, "when Rose grows up, will she continue the work you do?" Michael smiled. "Klaus, Rose will choose her own path in life just as you will. Choose yours. What matters is that both of you grow up knowing you can make a difference in the world." "Daddy, I already know what I want to be when I grow up." "What?" "And I want to be a lawyer like you to help families who've been treated unfairly." Michael was deeply moved. "Klaus, if that's truly your calling when you're older, I'll be very proud. But remember, there are many ways to help people. What matters is finding your own way." In the following years, Michael solidified his position as the foremost American authority on historical intellectual property cases. The National Commission he chaired became a model for similar initiatives in other countries. Young Klaus grew up observing his father's work and developed an early understanding of justice and human rights issues. Rose, though still very small, was also immersed in an environment where integrity and solidarity were constantly reinforced. "Michael," Anna Catherine said one quiet evening, "sometimes I wonder what our lives would be like if you'd never found that document in your grandmother's attic." "It would be completely different," Michael replied. "I'd probably still be a waiter. You might never have met me. Klaus and Rose might never have been born. Do you miss the simpler life from before?" Michael thought about the question. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity, Anna, but I don't regret anything. What we've lived, what we've achieved, the people we've helped, all of it is worth every hardship we've faced." "And what do you hope for the future?" I hope Klaus and Rose grow up to be honest and compassionate people. I hope the Commission continues to make a difference in the lives of wronged families. And I hope that when I'm old, I can look back and know I lived a life that mattered. Michael embraced Anna Catherine. But most of all, I hope to still have you by my side for all the important moments. 15 years after discovering Klaus Fischer's document, Michael had become a respected national figure, helped hundreds of families regain their dignity, and founded institutions that would carry on his work for generations. But perhaps his greatest achievement was raising a family built on the same values that had guided Klaus Fischer: honesty, generosity, and dedication to the common good. "Klaus," Michael said to his great-grandfather during one of his visits to Rose's grave, "we did everything we could to honor your memory. Now it's up to the next generations." Michael placed yellow flowers on the headstone and walked slowly home, where Anna Catherine, Klaus, and Rose were waiting for Sunday dinner, a family tradition they never abandoned, no matter how busy work became, because Michael had learned that the most important professional achievements in the world mean nothing if they aren't shared with the people we love. And when he arrived home and saw Klaus teaching Rose how to plant yellow flowers in the garden, Michael knew he had created the most important legacy of all, a family that would carry Klaus Fischer's values forward for generations to come. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you think Michael made the right choice by fighting for justice, despite so many challenges? We'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartfelt stories like this one.